When we think of ourselves as something fixed. This is what I am, this is no accident. Even if we accept that some aspects of ourselves are contingent, we hold that others are essential. One of those, oddly enough, can be musical taste. Think of the music you like. To like that kind of music almost seems hardwired into you, doesn't it? You may discover stuff through your peers or your environment, but what you like feels a part of what you are. Well, here's a thought experiment. What if you were born in North Africa? What kind of music would you have liked then? Or interior Jharkhand, or Iceland, or Peru, or Kazakhstan? It's likely that your favorite artist would have been someone you haven't even heard of right now. It's also possible that all the music you take with you to a desert island today would be stuff that you'd never discover in this thought experiment world. But my point is not that all our tastes are contingent on accidents like the accident of birth. In fact, I believe the opposite. I believe that our brains are wired to find pleasures in certain kinds of sound, and that there is something universal in music everywhere, however different it may seem to us. We can find rapture in Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan or Led Zeppelin or Tenariwen, and that rapture is rooted in the human condition, in the effect that music has on us, and it's basically the same rapture. It may seem at a superficial level that we are different like our music is different. But the point is, the music isn't different. There is a universal pentatonic.
Welcome to The Seen and the Unseen, our weekly podcast on economics, politics, and behavioral science. Please welcome your host, Amit Varma.
Welcome to The Scene and the Unseen. Serendipity is a strange thing. In January this year, I released an episode with my friend Chuck Gopal in which we riffed on the Beatles for a while. In response to that, Warren Mendonsa of Blackstrat Blues said on Twitter that the next time we discuss the Beatles, he wanted to be in on it. Warren is a legend of the indie music scene, and while I hadn't even heard all his stuff, I loved some of the early work that I had heard, such as Anuva Sky, which has been on my playlist of comfort music for years. So I jumped at the chance to ask him on the show and to go a little deeper into his work and his art. And because I felt my musical knowledge was not good enough to go as deep as I wanted, I asked Chuck to be my co-host for the episode, and I'm so grateful that Chuck agreed. He came over to my place, so we were both in my home studio while Warren recorded remotely from his home in Auckland. I loved this episode not just because of this conversation, but also because it took me on a superb journey of discovering that part of Warren's music that I hadn't heard yet. I've been driving people nuts by playing Ode to a Sunny Day on repeat. Before we get to this conversation though, let's take a quick commercial break. One of the themes of this episode is that even though all music has local flavor, music itself is universal. Well, you can turn that around when it comes to crime. Human nature is twisted and crime is everywhere, but it has a local flavor everywhere. This episode is sponsored by a podcast that is all about Desi crime. Aishwarya Singh and Aryan Misra are the hosts of the Desi Crime podcast, which covers crimes from India, Pakistan, Nepal, basically any place you'd call Desi. Their show description has this sentence which hooked me right away. Quote, crimes that take place in the Indian subcontinent aren't remotely similar to Western crimes. Desi crimes are gory, complicated, corrupt, and hardly documented. Stop quote. Aishwarya and Aryan take us on a wild ride as they tell us these gory and complicated stories. They tell us about the most prolific murderer in history, Thug Behram. They give us an inside dope on the massacre of the Nepali royal family. We get suicide pacts and police brutality, disappearing journalists and charming serial killers. If you like storytelling and crime interests you, you should listen to the Desi Crime Podcast. You can find it on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, wherever you listen to your podcasts. So check out the Desi Crime Podcast. There is no better way to kill time. Warren and Chuck, welcome to The Scene and the Unseen.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And thank you for having me as a co-host.
Okay, so, in the spirit of how these episodes sometimes go, let's just talk about what we were talking about in the moment, which is that we had great trouble getting Chuck's mic to work, and he finally got it to work. And he said, as soon as it started working, that I'm not going to touch anything, right? Something like that?
Yeah, something of that sort.
Yeah, and Warren, you mentioned you had a story about that, so let's start with the story.
Okay, the story is I used to be in a band called Zero, and we used to practice in this old house in Shivaji Park called Uday Vihar. Now, being an old house, of like, I think 30s or 40s or whenever it was built, the electric grounding was a bit suspect. So when we used to practice, first of all, we used to get shocks from each other. And if one person touched the other person, it was like a severe jhatka. So we learned not to touch each other while practicing, you know. So the issue then became with distortion, all that noise became amplified. So you had to find a way of grounding the amplifiers. So me being electrical engineering student knew that there was a water pipe running outside. So we got some sandpaper, cleaned it a little bit, put a wire around it, soldered it in place, brought that wire in and grounded the amps. Problem became in the monsoon, the connection would become intermittent. So Rajiv had to go outside while we were playing our guitars and jiggle the wire till the noise was gone. And then he was told, okay, leave it, don't touch anything, it's just fine right now. And then again, if the noise came, he would have to go out and repeat the process. Then a few months, I think later, we got complaints that your guys are too loud, neighbors are complaining. So we figured the room we were practicing in was the first room closest to the main road. So we said we'll go to the next room. When we went to the next room, the power was grounded over there. Then we realized we could have just taken an extension box and plugged it into that room.
Yeah, it's such such jugaru lives kind of musicians lived with. I remember reading somewhere that a musician's best friend is duct tape. So this episode really happened when you heard the episode between Chuck and me, and you said next time we discuss the Beatles, kindly call me. So here we are. Now there's a lot we want to discuss apart from the Beatles, but we thought a nice way to kind of get it going is actually to talk about the Beatles, because in one of your interviews I read something moving where you said that the most memorable memory from your childhood, as it were, was when you heard the Beatles for the first time. So tell us a little bit about, what they meant to you and what they have meant to you since.
Well, from the moment I was a kid and I could barely talk, like my aunt who used to live with us at the time had this big poster of the Beatles. So I'd learned all their names, I used to say John, Paul, George, Ringo, and everything. So, that was like the awareness for, who the Beatles were, and I was from a young age. And it was a bit later, I think, when I was around 8, after I went through a beef MC Hammer phase. Someone gave me this compilation cassette, and there was a Beatles medley in that. And it was one of those, the Now Party, whatever, this compilation thing. So there was that Beatles medley. Suddenly, of all the songs, that made the most sense to me, age 8. So I said, what is this? So I went to my dad, who's also a musician. And he said, well, you should probably get into the Beatles at this point. You'll kind of, understand a little bit more about the, the basics of music and everything like that. So I tried getting my hands. We had some cassettes at home, so I listened to that. And then my uncle had the mother load. He had all the albums on vinyl. So my dad's sister's husband, his name is Carlisle. Awesome guy. So he used to give me one by one, like a lending library vinyl. I used to take it to the local guy who had one vinyl player and one cassette deck, and he would do the transfer because I didn't have a working, vinyl player at home. So all these cassette transfers became then like my textbook, So I think between age 8 to 13, I literally did not listen to anything else. That was it. Every single album, everything went into, and I used to sit with my guitar and slowly tried. And then I found out how to slow down the tape, learn solos in half speed and stuff like that. And for bass lines, you had to speed up the tape so you could hear the bass more clearly, all that kind of stuff. So then, kind of what I became as a musician, a large part of that came from that initial grounding experience, because at the same time I started, sitting with the guitar a little bit more seriously. So there you go. That's the Beatles story for you.
So one follow-up question that I'll ask is, interestingly also you said that was your basic grounding, and you have two grounding stories really over there, but two different kinds of grounding entirely. Anyone who listens to the Beatles now, it's very apparent that there's been an evolution, right, from the early, I want to say, boy band phase, right, to the later psychedelic and experimental phase. But how did you react to that as a 8 to 13-year-old? Were you able to track that evolution? Did you hear the albums chronologically? Just curious to hear about, something like that.
The older I got, the more sense the later albums made to me. So initially, the first early albums, Please Please Me, the first 2 or 3 albums, that was what I gravitated to most. And then obviously there are songs on the later albums like Let It Be and Hey Jude, which are very accessible. So I used to love those as well. But then the first time I heard a song like Tomorrow Never Knows, I got really scared. I was like, I don't think I'm supposed to be listening to this music. It's kind of like weird and everything. So I kind of put that on the back burner. And then, as you go closer to puberty, all that stuff starts making a little bit more sense to you.
So you did listen to them chronologically.
I tried to. I mean, I can still tell you like which album comes after what, and it's like so well etched in my mind. The moment one song stops, I can hear the next song starting. My daughter thinks I'm nuts because I start singing the next song and then it starts.
Yeah, that must be spooky. I read this essay by Ted Joya recently, or I think it was in his interview with Tyler Cowen, where he mentioned how the Beatles for those 5 or 6 years, the significant thing about them was they kept evolving every 5 6 months, and the reason, according to him, that was important is that every time you have somebody who becomes a breakthrough hit, what they're doing becomes a formula, and people immediately rush to imitate
Exactly.
that and copy that, and they were changing every 6 months. And his point was, look, they do something in 1964, the Monkeys comes along and does something really similar, but by the time the Monkeys is out, they've moved on, and they're moving on over a period. So in a sense, would you then say that it's kind of listening to the Beatles discography is like an accelerated education in music also, where you're just getting so many different styles, from your really basic pop song like the early stuff to much more complicated stuff later on?
Yeah, certainly. But I mean, even by the second or the third album, you could hear like them changing things. Like in "She Loves You," for example, "She Loves You," and that one minor chord comes in, like the four minor. That's like something that you wouldn't have heard, a little while before. So you can sense that sophistication coming in really quickly. I think also what happens is the moment an artist experiences some kind of mass success, there's all this kind of acceptance that comes in. So you feel more. Um, you're more likely to take risks because you know that otherwise you're always wondering, will people like it, will people, but now they come to a point in popularity where like everyone loves what they do, so it makes sense for them to take those risks. And you can see the acceleration is really quick by the time they became popular, because by the time I think 63 was the first album, before that they had spent years playing covers in Hamburg and the repertoire was vast. They would have listened to like everything from jazz and whatever top 40 and was going in to the rock and roll and everything like that. So huge range of influences already, and that's kind of already percolating. And by the time the first album hits, you can see it just go whoop. From 63, Please Mr. Postman, 66, Your Sergeant Pepper comes along. That's 3 years. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, one of the things that we started our conversation, Amit, with was I had a theory that if the discography of the Beatles was slightly flipped, and Sergeant Pepper's, for some magical reason, was the first album, and then Please Please Me, etc., came later, that the history of music would have been completely different, because the Beatles wouldn't have had that initial fan base, and then something experimental like Sergeant Pepper's wouldn't have had a mass audience to be tested out on. And that's something we debated, and we'd love to know what you think about that.
Yeah, I think for sure, because even a guy like John Mayer, if you notice his career, the initial albums are a little bit more poppy and, designed to get into the mainstream really quickly. Once those 2 or 3 albums go by and you become a household name, that's when you see, hey man, I'm going to take some risks and, do something different. And plus, what happens is then the people who are controlling the money supply are less likely to worry. They say, this guy knows what he's doing, let's let him do it. Don't need to get involved. So then you have those abilities to do that. Otherwise, there's always someone saying, hey, make it more like this or make it more like that, or maybe your pants should be blue and your shoes should be green, that sort of thing. And that kind of gets in the way of a certain creative flow, because sometimes when too many people make those decisions, the art tends to suffer.
Yeah, and I think that's a great business lesson itself over there for a company who's already popular or something. If they're launching something experimental, then it's likely that that will find acceptance with investors as well as audiences. But that's just me extrapolating what you said.
I mean, I don't think it would work in a business context, because I think, one day you're a startup, you innovate in some way, you're a disruptor. But once you become a big company, then you become set in your ways. Your
Fair
incentives are
enough.
for just keep on doing the same thing. And but I guess I want to ask a question that, in fact, I ask all the historians who come on the show, and I think it's particularly apt when you're talking about the Beatles. Now, there's something gent named Thomas Carlyle had come up with something called the Great Man Theory of History, and there are really two schools of thought on this. And Carlyle's Great Man Theory of History really postulates that history is made by great man at some point. And of course, back in those days, everything was a male gender, so therefore the great man and not the great person theory. But the idea being that they'll be a great person, they'll do something great, and history changes. Whereas the counterpoint to that is that no, there are currents in history which are happening anyway, and things are going to go where they're going to go. And individuals don't matter so much. So, in the context of the Beatles, how would you look at that? Like, my sense is that music history would have been vastly different if, say, if John and Paul hadn't met. You can pick your sort of great man equivalent of choice. You could pick Led Zepp or you could pick Dylan, depending on what you kind of listen to. So is that something you'd kind of tend to agree with, or would you say that there are currents which are going in a particular way, even if you didn't have that specific group, music would have continued evolving in the same kind of way? What's your sense?
I think it's also down to the level of influence they had among other bands. There was a lot of other bands that were very influenced by what they were doing. I mean, they were the first guys to actually start writing their own songs, if you look at it, because there was a lot of that, A&R, we'll get the song from somewhere, give it to the singer to sing. And these guys come along. And there's also that class thing which was broken down because they were these, Northern England people. So in that English sense, they kind of opened up the thing. And then the crossover to America. Then that cross-pollination which had been happening is blown wide open, So in that sense, you can't discount, like, musically aside, if you're just looking at historically, that would have definitely changed. There wouldn't be an Aerosmith without the Beatles, or a vast number of other bands like that. I mean, I don't think you'd have the opportunity for, like, say, what's like a not as famous British band, like, say, Jethro Tull. Jethro Tull wouldn't have the ability to be popular in America unless that initial barrier had been broken down. And who did it? It was them.
Interesting. So it's not just musically. Another way of phrasing Amit's question, and this is something I often think about, is which artist, if removed from rock history, would have had the maximum ripple effect across? And it's another way of phrasing the question that you asked, is the great man theory. But any name that springs to mind for you?
Hendrix.
Yeah?
Yeah. I mean, not just guitar players, a lot of other musicians were. I mean, Miles Davis was very interested in what Hendrix was doing. So that only goes to show.
Yeah.
Great. So let's start by where my shows often start, which is kind of your personal history. I mean, you were born in the right when the 70s were ending. You grew up in Dadar. Tell us a little bit about what your childhood was like, because like I'm a little older than you, and I remember back in those days, just you couldn't the stuff people today take for granted. Like you can listen to any music in the world and all of that. We couldn't take that shit for granted. It was such a big deal and such an achievement to put a mixtape together. For example, you discovered music by a band, you would have to scrounge high and dry for some other album by them, even for information about like who are these guys and all of that. So tell us something about sort of the texture of your childhood growing up, and what those years were like.
Sure. So, I mean, I was really lucky in that sense because I was born into a musical family. So I was already surrounded by music, the act of creating it, the act of listening to it, all of that. And the access to music obviously wasn't as good as it was now, but at least my dad had good taste, so a lot of his cassettes became like part of my education. Like when I wanted to listen to Clapton, he gave me all the Cream stuff. He said, listen to that first, so at least I had that. And then I had uncles and my dad's friends, other musicians who would drop in and give some, like my uncle Loy. He, at the time I was a kid, he used to live in Delhi, so he used to come down once in a while, and every time like he would come down one little nugget of Gyan, my first rock and roll riff or something like that I would get from him. When I was just born, we didn't have a TV at home. That came when I was like, say, 4 or 5. It was on black and white number. And again, what TV was like at that time. There was nothing in the English sense. It was like basically government messages and some, in fact, I think my brother was the one, he started calling everyone to watch TV when the ads came on because the ads were in English. Hey, the ads are on. Come and watch. And there was some cool jingle or something or the other. So at least that was culturally, relevant. So I never really got into any of the, Indian classical music or anything like that. In fact, it was almost like an imposition at times. Like, can we please escape from this? Give us something apart from this. And, that Sunday morning He-Man used to come on. That was like one escape. Then there was another program. There's this German thing called Transtel. just to show. At least it was not in Hindi, so it was a little bit more understandable. And things like that. And once in a while, something would come on, and then suddenly a world would light up. And I remember watching, like, see that Eagles Hell Freezes Over. They put that was like more towards the 90s or whatever. But then things had gotten a bit better. But just the whole retrieval of information became like every little nugget was treasured. And like how they do sugarcane juice, they remove every last bit of juice, so that became a little bit more valuable. Now the information is so widely available. Even in fact, if I give you like the best advice in the world, there's a chance it will just get wasted. Someone will think, it's just another person giving some gyan. There's a chance like that. So it's a very different world we live in today.
Yeah, in fact, one of your Black Sad Blues albums is called The Last Analog Generation. And, you mentioned about how when your daughter was born, you kind of wanted to document what has gone, and we are the last analog generation in a sense. So when you look at the way that she's growing up, for example, and you think of the way that you grew up, what are the differences that you see in terms of how you're discovering music, how you're experiencing music, or anything else for that matter? Like, not in terms of lamenting the good old days, or not in terms of passing a value judgment of one generation having a better time than the other, but just in terms of differences. What have you noticed?
I mean, at this age, she's still getting a lot of the music from the parents, so our tastes, but now she is starting to discover, like, I like certain things. So she'll make me make a playlist of her favorite songs that is then bajaued ad infinitum in the car. So, we're at her mercy. Can we please not listen to that same song again? That sort of thing. But apart from that, I've noticed, like, as we get older, we get a little bit more judgmental about what is good and what is bad, where she doesn't have that. If she likes it, she likes it. She's not really analyzing it to that extent. It's got a good beat. That's the main thing. It's got a good melody. The chord changes are nice notes, weird notes and stuff like that. It's all good. So I used to be the same way when I was a kid. In that sense, humans are built in similar ways. Where it will change is when she gets a little bit older and she wants to, live. I like one of my nieces, I think, is around 14 or 15. Oh no, now she must be 16 or something. So she was listening to Thin Lizzy. I was like, oh, you like Thin Lizzy? And I gave her a few recommendations and everything, like a good uncle and everything. But it's cool. I mean, I think the good music will still find an audience. The ones who are ready to look for it, for them, it's easier now than ever. You just go to Spotify or whatever and say, give me a best of Thin Lizzy, and otherwise I had to go to the shop and order the cassette, which took like a month to come, that sort of thing. So, I don't know. It's kind of interesting because in a certain way, humans will always be built a certain way. And in ways, the ease of access is going to definitely be a fully different way of doing things.
There's something I wanted to ask a little later, but it makes so much sense asking it now, which is we will have a conversation on form versus content and all that later. But do you think that in some sense, what music itself is changing? Like when you were growing up, when we were growing up, it was audio only. And today it's almost hard to separate out music from, say, a music video, or to a completely new generation like your niece, it might be the associated TikTok meme or something like that. Do you think that has a bearing on the music itself, that there's also an associated music video? Like I can't think of Do I Want to Know without thinking of that music, that iconic music video, for instance. Is that something you thought about?
I think with every generation, there'll always be curious ones, and there'll always be ones who will just follow the trend and listen to whatever's dished out to them. There'll be ones who are prepared to look and dig deeper, and those ones will find it. But I don't know in terms of percentages, how many of them will be one versus the other. But there'll always be people, I'm telling, with every generation, there'll be someone who's still listening to BB King or whatever. There'll be someone who's, as long as it's there, it's accessible. For example, if his music is gone from all the servers or something like that, then it may be a little bit tough. Then they'll have to go and dig out vinyls and find a vinyl player to play it and all that kind of stuff. But as long as it's available, and the ease of access also becomes a big part of the thing. Because if you notice, like the ones whose videos are easily found on YouTube, for example, will be, getting across to younger listeners more easily than the ones who don't.
Yeah, Mike, the question, though I was actually getting at was, is what we consider as music, is that changing from only audio to something that is audio plus visual, and who knows, when in the metaverse it might be audio plus visual plus how you're feeling and all that. That's really what I was getting to.
It's always been changing ever since MTV came out, which was what, 1981, you know. Yeah, the moment it became visual, there was no turning back from that. And then it will only go further from being a purely audio form, you know. I don't know. I mean, I'm still able to listen to music without any distractions. Once in a while, maybe I'll pick up my phone and, if a message comes on or something, like, which is why I tend to like disable notifications on all devices. Like, fuck that. If I want to check it, I'll check it. Otherwise, don't tell me when to check, that sort of thing. But I mean, it's going to be different for different people. Different people will have the ability to devote their attention span to listening to an entire album, A Dark Side of the Moon, for example. And the first time you listen to it, it'll blow your mind, But then who wants to listen to it? You have to see how many of them are there versus the ones who, think money is something that you pay.
Yeah, speaking of MTV, I actually worked there for a bit in the 90s. And and the first video ever was Video Killed the Radio Star. So maybe a more appropriate anthem would be Influencer Killed the Musician Star, which might be kind of coming upon us. My other question is this, that I agree with you when you say that in every generation there'll be kids who'll want to go outside the beaten track in terms of whatever the mainstream stuff is and discover their own music, and their taste will take them wherever they do. But could it also be said that the notion of a mainstream has changed, if not dissolved? Like Steve Van Zandt of the E Street Band, in an interview, he spoke about how rock was mainstream for like 30 years, from the Beatles or Dylan going electric to maybe Nirvana. And after that, everything kind of just splintered, and there is no longer one mainstream. And that is a trend I see happening across everything else, not just music. Like in terms of media, you had a consensus on the truth, you had these mainstream outlets, and now it's completely dispersed. People get their narratives from all over the place. There is no more a consensus on truth. Similarly, just in terms of entertainment, would it be the case that tastes are much more dispersed and fragmented, which of course would have the negative impact that musicians, it becomes harder to make money, but at the same time you could say that it becomes easier to make money in a way because a long tail is enabled, because many more people can form what Kevin Kelly called, the 1,000 true fans, and you can reach out to them. So, these sort of conflicting thoughts kind of come to me. So what's your sense of it?
You ever notice, like, when we were kids and there were only two channels, there's a bigger chance that everyone watched the same thing. Then when Star TV came and, then if someone was watching this, that splintering has kept going on with technology as we get to the point. It also depends upon how easily influenced you are by your peer group as well. Suddenly someone will, I remember one friend, hey, look at this band from the States, Nirvana. Like, suddenly everyone got into that. And, that's how it kind of spread in that sense. So, I mean, we're still social in that way. We're not kind of isolated from each other. So there's a chance of, at least that kind of spread among, like a social group, for example. With regards to reaching an audience, I don't know, man, because the thing is, right now, everything is up in the air, first of all. Because you're competing for attention spans, basically, with everything else that's out there, not just music. You're competing with video games, with, sport, with everything else. Because the thing is, now, whatever you're interested in, you can just go and find so much content. There's no way you're going to get through it all. If I suddenly get into Stratocaster bridges, for example, I can find like a year's worth of content to watch. Now, I'm not that interested in it. I'm like somewhat interested. I'm just saying the fact that there's 1 year of content to watch about Stratocaster bridges. Whereas if I had to see a guitar on TV, I would feel happy. So I don't know, man. I think we just live in a strange world. It's kind of hard to predict and say, this is what's going to happen, because first of all, you don't even know the whole metaverse thing, how it's going to, play out. For me personally, it scares the hell out of me. But then I feel like an old person who, when internet came, like, what is this internet? So, I mean, you kind of need to adapt and just keep an open mind. But obviously, if there's things that show that they're going to be harmful to us as a society and as a planet or whatever, you know where it's
Yeah, there's
heading.
that famous video of Bill Gates and David Letterman, I think circa 96 or something, and Letterman's making fun of him, saying, "What is this internet thing?" and all of that. And Bill Gates is like, "You can get sports update." And David Letterman is like, "But I can turn on the radio for that." So, so I really hesitate to be negative about, say, Web3 or, any of these newfangled things I don't understand, because my assumption is maybe there's something I don't get. Maybe we are the uncles. But just sort of going back to just following up on what you just said, that when the three of us mention the Beatles, it is immediately understood that we all know the Beatles, that there is a common place in our consciousness that the Beatles holds. That, in a sense, Ted Joya used a lovely phrase where he said that music is like a kind of cloud memory that sort of connects people in this manner. And that's the thing that I wonder if the next generation will not have, that one person's Beatles won't be the other person's Beatles, because they've just gone on such incredibly different tracks. Like, for example, when I get into YouTube rabbit holes, I have a regular account, and at one point I said that, okay, just to understand it a little better, I need to understand what the Hindutva right wing rabbit holes are like, those extreme guys. But I didn't want it to mess up my algorithm, so I incognito window a different Google account. And the thing is that now those are two completely different YouTubes. Those two different YouTubes that I see on my regular account and my incognito account have no relation to each other. And I think that's analogous of the experience that different young people have today, where they're not actually watching a common stream, where there is no Beatles as such. I mean, I remember Jonathan Haidt once said that you might think that kids today would understand the past much better because everything, all of history, it's available to them. But his point was that everybody is watching content that was created in the last 3 days, you know so we are constantly sort of in this chakravyu, as it were, where content keeps coming, we keep watching, but there's no space for sitting back and reflection. Those common connections aren't there. So a bit of a ramble, but any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, we should be actually listening to what these right wing people are on about, just so we understand that they're not crazy. There's obviously something that's going on in their heads, and the only way to reach some kind of a consolation, because at the end we're all humans. We have to share the same planet. There's no point like spewing hate, whichever side of the battle or whatever you're on. The very fact that there's become such a a huge divide between us as a society is like really alarming. Everywhere you go, every country, you kind of find like that kind of conflict. And if these algorithms are only fueling that further because no one is getting to see the other point of view, that whole us and them happens. You guys suck, you guys suck. I mean, like, both sides have got some bad things about it, that you can take each side too far. If you can go, like, there are crazy people in the left wing as well, you know so I guess at the point where we can somewhat understand what each other has to say, okay, I get, like, you don't like what this does or whatever, but at least let's eat what we want to eat, wear what we want to wear, do what we, without harming. Basically, the every religion should just scrap all their books and put one rule: don't be an asshole. That's it. For now, I think this is the only message the world needs: don't be an asshole. In our own lives, we find the times where we are an asshole. So, like, let's not be assholes for a little while till things get a bit better.
You could form a new religion around that.
Yeah, man, just don't be an asshole. That's it.
There were two trains of thought that were running in my head. One, you said that most of the content that we consume right now happened in the last 3 days. And there's another article related to music that both of us read, which is new music is old music is killing new music. And Warren, I'm guessing you saw that as well, because Rick Beato did a video on that too. And one of the astonishing facts over there was increasingly people are listening to older music. I have struggled to reconcile my head around these two facts at the same time. And maybe there is no answer over here, but I just wanted to know what you thought about that. Because people are listening to older music. Another video that Rick Beato had done was actually he had compared the following that new artists had along with older artists. And it was quite surprising because some of the legacy artists, like Queen, for instance, had a lot of subscribers and were very relevant to even his son's generation, for example. Just wanted to know what you thought about that. That on one hand, you have, okay, there's so much content being created and we are consuming everything that's being created. A lot of the stuff that we're consuming happened in the last 3 days. And at the same time, a lot of the legacy content is also being consumed, be it books, be it music, be it films even. So yeah, just wanted to get your take on that.
basically the algorithms work like this. Things become more popular as they become more popular. You know what I mean? Yeah, that's how it works. So now the Queen thing, for example, I'd trace it to that movie, which was hugely popular. That kind of drove a huge spike in listeners. And then because of that, more people got to listen to it. So the more people listen to it, the more people get to listen to it. You know what I mean? That's just how it works. With the Beatles, now this Get Back thing just came out. So again, I'm just looking at musicians my age as well. More people are talking about it. Otherwise, it was kind of like, yeah, everyone knows what the Beatles is, right? And but now this like kids also are, being faced with that. This is what's coming out, and it becomes popular, so people talk about it. So you want to go and check it out.
Yeah, that's interesting. This is kind of like stuff from the past is being repurposed in various ways, and then that drives spikes. There was this interesting thing that happened a couple of years back, the TikTok Fleetwood Mac thing. I don't know if you guys
Yeah,
remember this.
the
So,
guy drinking that, yeah, on the skateboard.
yeah, so for those who don't know what this is about, especially since we can't see TikTok here in India, there was a video of a guy. It wasn't a content creator or an influencer or anything like that. He was drinking a juice called Ocean Spray, and he was skateboarding down his road, and he was humming along to Dreams, I think it was,
Yeah,
by
yeah,
Fleetwood Mac, and he was just humming it out. And for no reason at all, that managed to go viral. It became a meme of its own. Mick Fleetwood and I think Stevie Nicks also did their own versions of this, and this led to Ocean Spray. It was not a branded campaign by them or anything, but it ended up becoming a huge thing for the brand. And the song entered the Billboard top 100 after what, 30, 40 years. I guess that's an example of what you're talking about. It is some random accident somewhere, or a planned cultural event like a Queen movie or a Beatles documentary that brings a lot of these old things back and makes them relevant again for a younger audience, as well as oldies like us who just want to relive some of that. So I guess there's something over there.
yeah. Because I guess when I was a kid, I was listening to the Beatles while the other kids in my class were listening to Guns N' Roses. Because I remember one girl telling me, "Why are you listening to this old-fashioned music?" I said, "No, no, like this is like what I want to listen to." And then I learned "Sweet Child of Mine" on the guitar just to like shut her up. So
You remind me of that TikToker who had, again, it goes back to TikTok again. You remember that Metallica girl from last year? She is an R&B singer and hip hopper or something, and she was wearing a Metallica T-shirt. And metal fans, being metal fans, they're like, "Oh, you're like hip hop person wearing a Metallica thing. Bet you don't even know 3 Metallica songs." And she went on her next video and said, "I can instead of naming them, I'd rather just play them for you on the guitar." And she shredded her way through Master of Puppets, the solo of one, and a couple of others as well. So,
nice.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of that phenomenon, I mean, and even before this, I remember a few years back, forget TikTok, there was a TV commercial, I think, of Volkswagen with Nick Drake's Pink Moon. And Nick Drake suddenly became big for a short while again, which is great because I love the guy, though that's not perhaps his favorite song of mine. But, what you said about what is popular, lead that sort of vicious circle that starts reminds me of this experiment. I don't know if I'll be able to, if I remember the details well enough, but the whole idea of the experiment was that these guys gave an app with a few thousand songs to a couple of hundred kids. But they programmed those apps so it would randomly show which were the 10 most played ones and which were the most popular. So all of them had different top 10 lists in their apps. Like not 300 different, but maybe 30 different, 10 people each. And the thing is, that's exactly what happened, what Warren said. The stuff that was already on the charts got listened to more, and therefore it kind of spiraled. And you had completely separate trajectories for the music in for each of the control groups, which is kind of fascinating because that also sort of tells you a little bit about just the role of sheer dumb luck. That if you kind of happen to somehow make it, then you continue making it. Like that whole Billy Joel story about how Piano Man came out and then it was going nowhere, and his label was just had given up on him, and and then this one guy who was passionate about it started taking it around to all the radio stations, and somebody gave it a play, and after it was dead, it is revived, and Billy Joel becomes Billy Joel. But
Yeah, but arguably, luck has played a role throughout history. Right now, our context for that is Spotify algorithms. Back in the day, it might have been something else. What if what if Paul had never met John for whatever reason that day? So yeah, I guess we can. All these are what ifs experiments. Except now, instead of meeting in a place, now it's did you discover this on TikTok or something like that?
I've got a killer idea for a movie, by the way. So there's this band from the 70s, like relatively popular band from the 70s. And they're in their tour bus, and the tour bus hit some kind of weird wormhole, and they get transported to, I don't know about COVID times, but at least present day. And they have to suddenly deal with this thing called social media. and and also streaming services and everything is like totally different, so like how they deal with that. And my idea was for these like macho metal guys to meet a band of young girls who then shows them how to do this.
Yeah, actually, that actually sounds pretty interesting, and that was another thing that Amit and I actually discovered. He asked me a very fascinating question, and I'd love to know what your take on this would be. Suppose Waters and Gilmore actually form Pink Floyd today, how would things be different?
Man, there's no Rick Wright. That guy was like the secret weapon. But anyway, yeah, being a purist aside, I don't know. I think they'd still be able to make good music. I wouldn't put it past them. It just depends what time and place they are, because musicians are always, always changing. Like there's not one particular mindset. There's always of 150 things we could be doing. It just depends what appeals at that particular time. Suddenly the wind changes and they decide, okay, it's a good idea to work together. Then you've got it, and if not, then not.
No, I think our speculation really was that because like if they were young today and growing up today, the palette of music they would listen to would be completely different, and therefore who knows what direction they would go in. And in fact, to return to the subject of your sort of evolving years, there is also the counterfactual that if you weren't born in the family you were born in, where your father is a bass guitarist and your uncle is Loy and all of that, that if you weren't exposed to that kind of music, if you were in a South Indian family listening to Carnatic, or if you were, somewhere else listening only to Bollywood in a village in Bihar, totally different directions, different counterfactuals. But tell me a little bit about, then how you got sort of turned on to playing music, what your other early influences were. Like I remember you talking about how your dad, when he first showed you chords on the guitar, he showed you A minor and E, which aren't really the typical sort of standard ones. So tell me a little bit about, that phase of your life where you're into music, you're discovering music, beyond the Beatles, who else were the people you kind of fell in love with, and how did that sort of start evolving from
Okay,
there?
so let's get to when the Beatles, rather the only Beatles phase was ending. So that was around 13. Now the hormones have started to kick in. And by this time, I kind of started catching up with what the rest of the, peer group was listening to. So I think Guns N' Roses had done Live and Let Die. So I say, oh, they've covered Paul McCartney. They can't be that bad. Let me check it out. So I got that Illusion 1 album. That was the first one I actually listened to in entirety. I'd listened to a couple of songs from Appetite, but this was like the first album listen. So I found it really enjoyable. November Rain came, very lovely melodies, great guitar solos. I was like, yeah, this is some cool stuff. And then we had started seeing their videos also on Star TV around the same time. So it kind of, everyone said, oh, Guns N' Roses became a thing. So that was around 13. Then for some reason, I got a Kira and I started tracing back further. Like, where are these guys coming from? Then I got into Aerosmith, and then Led Zeppelin hit in a huge way. I think that was around, say, 15 or something like that. I got that Led Zeppelin 4 album. And then the next thing you know, I'm on one huge rabbit hole, as you tend to. And then all my lunch money is going into buying cassettes, that sort of thing. And during this time, the guitar became more of a social connection as well, because I had a friend, Johan, who I've known since I was a child, because our dads knew each other. Dads were musicians, but both were bass players, so they never played in the same band. So luckily for us, Johan played bass and I played guitar. In fact, actually, I started on bass when I was a kid. But my dad said, listen, you're probably going to get a lot better at music if you learn to play guitar. It's more like harmony and everything, more open. You can still play bass, but don't forget to play guitar as well. So luckily around that time I was playing guitar, he was playing bass, so we started jamming together. And I used to go to his house, we had just gotten out of school. He's 1 year older than me, so both of us in the same school. So we had gotten out of school and I used to go to his house to jam. He used to have this little drum machine that his dad had given him. So he used to program a beat on that and he would play. And both of us around the same time started listening to a lot of music together, like Cream and a lot of classic rock. We had this one cassette, MCA Records compilation. So there was Lynyrd Skynyrd, Freebird, and a whole bunch of songs which, like Born to Be Wild and all that kind of thing. You still remember till this day. So we started listening to music together, started trading cassettes and that kind of stuff. I remember one day we were sitting and jamming, and he was playing bass along with the drum machine, and I was playing guitar. I was so like absorbed in what I was playing. I woke up and I was I opened my eyes and I went to talk to him, and he had left the room. He had programmed the bass line as well in that machine, and he had left. I was in an empty room with the guitar. Yes, we had a lot of these like nice formative, like just playing with other musicians. That became a big thing. And then he had these next door neighbors, Rajiv and Bobby, who then I later on got into a band with them. But they had a kind of a jam thing where it wasn't really like a band where we went and played gigs and stuff, but we just get together and just play music. So this kind of went along for like around a year. And then Sid Cooter, who was another childhood friend, but he had never lived in Bombay. His dad was always, traveling outside the city. He came back to Bombay after like many years. So my mom kind of, made sure, because he lived down the road, go be friends, how moms are. I remember once she said, you can't go jam unless you take him with you as well. So I had to go and call him, and he came with his bright green guitar and everything. And he was louder than everyone else. I remember that. So then that kind of became a thing. And then Sid, Johan, and me got into a band together called Vicious Circle. And the whole deal with the band was we couldn't play anything after 1980. That was our cutoff. So anything after 1980 was not on the set list. So it kind of gave us some kind of a direction, So we played everything from Deep Purple, Zepp, the usual classic rock stuff. And the whole thing was Sid was playing drums and singing. So we played our first gig, and he was behind the drums. And everyone said, you guys are lip syncing, there's no singer. So he got really bugged about that. He said, I'm never going to be, doing this behind the drums singing again. We need to get a singer. So we got a singer. This guy called Sean Gomes. And he was a big Dire Straits and U2 fan. So some of that stuff also was incorporated. U2 kind of just about got in because like there was like one or two songs that were before 1980. So, or 1980 itself. So that became like the first proper band where we actually got together and started practicing and all that kind of stuff. And we actually got pretty tight. I remember we used to play Stormbringer, and at the end of it, like we used to look at each other like, "Wow, did we actually pull that off?" And it was actually not bad at all. We did our first gig at Raz, and I remember the first time Sid told me, let's play a gig at Raz. I was like, what? Are you kidding? We'll never get to play there. So I was a very realistic guy. Like, there's no way we're going to get to a point where we're playing at, a proper place where people pay money to come and watch you. So that happened. And just after that, that became like, something that we worked towards. And we did pretty well at that gig. All our friends came and watched. Everyone had a good time. We actually made a little bit of money or whatever, which we spent on food. So just after that gig, Johan left to study in the States. So now like back to square one. Sid and me were like, oh, what do we do? So he had the bright idea. The next door neighbors, they have a drum kit. Let's call them. So that became, what became Zero. And during this time, in between, the two bands, Sid and I started writing music together. And we found it quite effortless. Like I would come up with a chord progression, he would sing something on top of it. Hey, we've got a song, and we weren't really precious about it. That's the thing. When you're that age, you don't think too much about it. Just do it. You worry later about what's going to happen with this song and everything like that. So I think we had written Not My Kind of Girl, a song called Dear Jesus, which not too many people have heard, and a couple of other songs like that. And they were mainly like, chill out music. No, it wasn't like, loud, heavy rock and stuff like that. So when we finally got together as Zero, we tried playing covers. We sucked. And then it was like, if we play our own songs, nobody knows how these songs are supposed to go. So we can kind of get away with it. That was the whole, idea. It was a respite from the judging eyes of people who are well versed in, the cover music. And at that time, I think there was like a slight trend because you had bands like Indiscreet and Pentagram who were starting to, play significantly their own music, as opposed to the usual thing is like you play 10 songs and then just at the end, hey, this is one of ours, slip it in, that kind of a thing. So suddenly it was like, And it took a while for the audiences also to, to accept that. Otherwise, first they would give you a lot of shit initially, like, why aren't you playing the music that we want to hear? It's like, give it a chance. And the good thing, I guess, is our songs had very identifiable choruses. Because I think I said this before, if we didn't remember it, then the song was gone. So we had to kind of design it in a way so we could remember it. So then because of that, other people found it easy to remember as well. So that kind of, opened up a few doors. And then I guess from that, around that time is when Chuck probably started listening to Zero. He can fill you in on the rest.
So I have a question about the learning process. Like, one of the questions, like, I teach a writing course online, and one of the issues that some of my students will sometimes have is that, listen, I've written something, but it sucks. What do I do? Now, part of the time they are, of course, being too self-critical and overthinking it, but part of the time they're right, it sucks. And the way I look at it is that is not a reason to stop. That is a reason to continue, because you only become better through endless iteration. And all it means when you've done something and you think it sucks is that your judgment is better than your ability right now. And it's a good thing your judgment is good. But if you just continue working at it, your ability will catch up with your judgment sooner or later. It's just a question of putting in the work.
Unless your judgment keeps getting better.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it's a lifelong catching up process, I guess. Then, but so when you're learning, you've got all these influences, I'm guessing, from all over the place. You also mentioned how you were turned on to the Allman Brothers and to the 70s bands and so on. So when you're learning, you've got all these heroes, you want to play like this. What was that process like, in terms of what you're able to do and what you want to do but you're unable to do right now, but you want to do it? What was that learning process like? How do you keep doing it? Or is it just this youthful thing that you're just so enthusiastic you just keep on going? Because in this, I think also there is sort of a lesson for younger people who I think sometimes can give up too soon, and that's dangerous.
I think you need to find one thing that you can kind of do well that is going to serve as an inspiration to keep continuing. Like, I was pretty good at, like, hearing inside my head a melody and then being able to quickly find it on the fretboard. I don't know, kind of, it was a thing, I guess, a gift or whatever. But I still had to work on it, which is like, today I made a lesson, like 10 things I wish I knew about playing guitar on YouTube. One of the things I said is work on your strengths as well as your weaknesses. Don't forget the strengths, because you have to keep honing that as well for it to get better. If it's something that you can do, just learn how to do it better. And then automatically, which goes without saying, work on the stuff that you can't do as well to get better on that. But the things that you can do well should, kind of pull out the inspiration into doing the things that you can't do well. At least that's my advice to it. But there's got to be some amount of natural, not, I'm not going to say skill, but ability that comes into play that serves as inspiration. Otherwise, why would you want to do it? If you're going to cook and, like, you've been cooking for 2 years and every meal is a botched job, you don't want to actually, cook anymore unless you're starving. But if you, like, say after a few meals it gets better, like, you notice a little bit of improvement, that becomes like an inspiration, saying, hang on, I should just keep on doing that. And that's, at least for me, that's always what it served. I just need to keep getting better at whatever it is that I'm doing.
A question that I'll ask over here is, when you shifted from doing covers to writing your own songs, how did that change your playing style? Was it around this time that you realized that you had the strength of being able to translate your own melodies that you had in your head onto guitar? So I was just curious to see how that transition from doing Deep Purple covers to writing Not My Kind of Girl, how that came about, how that affected your own playing style.
Well, at the time, we actually had to learn guitar, Deep Purple songs. I've already kind of written Not My Kind of Girl. So it wasn't really suddenly it flipped over. There was always this parallel thing happening. You were learning other people's music as well as working on your own. The good thing about your own music, like I said, there was no preconceived notion about how something should be, something to live up to. So whatever you did, at least as long as you put yourself into it and you were able to listen back to it without cringing, that became like the goal. I put, like, whatever I'm hearing, into this. So at least I feel honest doing it. I'm not trying to be something that I'm not in that sense. On the other hand, it's still, something that I've done, but I need to make sure it's at a certain level, just so I can, because now I can listen back to some stuff, and some stuff is just like, no, let's not listen to that anymore.
Tell us then about sort of the early days of Zero. Like one of the things you mentioned is that you started as a five-person act. You, I think, went to a Mood Indigo at IIT Powai and you completely bombed. And the next time, one of you didn't show up, and you realized that hey, it's much tighter. Everything is kind of falling into place. This is better.
There was less to go wrong.
There was less to go wrong. Yeah, so tell me about your evolution as a band, and especially what I'm interested in is who were the other local bands you looked at that time as models? Because when you start off, you look at all the guys around you, which I guess in that era would be your Indiscreet, Parikrama, Pentagram, so on and so forth. Who are the guys you're looking at as possible models? What is that journey like also towards finding your own sound? Like you were pretty much, I think, the first band that I can remember which would only play originals, nothing else at all. So where did that kind of conviction come from?
I guess when we found people were able to recall the songs when they came back for the next gig, sometimes they would start singing the choruses. That was like a nice little validation or whatever it is you're doing. Still bands like Pentagram were still starting to play their own stuff, because I've watched Pentagram go from like a largely cover oriented set and very quickly start throwing their own material in by the time that first album came out and stuff like that from then onwards. So that also kind of was, like a peer group thing, like, okay, it's fine to do that. And even if you get galis, let it be. They'll come back the next time and then it'll be a little bit better, that sort of thing. By the time we had played IIT Mood Indigo for the third time, I think this was the year 2000, that was the year we decided, like, fuck it, let's not put one single cover on the set list. It has to be only our own music. And, that was it. As an identity, as this is who we are as a band, that has to be established. And again, the added bonus is the judges wouldn't be able to know when you made a mistake. As long as you were able to disguise it and not let it be a train wreck. One little thing, like if you miss the note here, then like it will become less easy for people to notice. I remember the first time we played PSP was at that IIT Mood Indigo gig. And Rajiv had just come back from the States, and we had to teach him PSP in one evening. And then when we are going on stage, the groove starts, boom, dun, 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 and then he comes running to me. How does the song start? It's like, I don't know, go ask Sid. He wrote that bit. So he was running to Sid, and Sid, I knew the melody, I didn't know the lyrics. So Sid knew the lyrics and he sang it to him in his ear. And all this while, no one suspects a thing is up. It just boom, just driving that groove through. And everything's like pretty tight at that point. And then finally he goes to the front of the stage and like he sings it like he owns it, at that point. So at least there was by then that ability to kind of take these little, pitfalls or mishaps and not care about it. Still, like, we are the guys on this stage. Yeah. So that particular gig went really well. Then because we won best band, best guitarist, and all those prizes. I remember like standing with my money in cash. It was 7,500 rupees, the most money I'd ever seen from a gig. And I gave all of it to my friend who had come back from the UK and bought me this thing called the EBO, which then went on to the studio recording of PSP. But that EBO was bought with my IIT Mood Indigo winnings.
Okay, kindly explain title of PSP 12 inches.
It's nothing really. It's just become a lot of a thing because the song became, relatively well known. The whole idea was, I'll tell you how this song started. So I came into practice, and this was for Strawberry Fields, NLS. Rajiv was in the States, so we had Gareth from Split, another Bombay band. They, he came for practice, but he was late. So when I walked in, Sid and Bobby had been waiting there for like a little while, and they had started playing that groove. And then I plugged in my guitar, and then as is customary with bands, you start making some noise along with what the other guys are playing. And, it kind of, after a while it fizzled out. But they had one nice chorus, just standing by, which they kept shouting. I thought it was a little annoying at first, but then I kind of said, it's got a thing to it. So this was cool. But then we didn't finish that song in time for NLS. Then once Rajiv came back, this was like 2 months later, I think October to December. Yeah. Rajiv came back, and then Moodai happened, and then we needed one more song to flush out the set list of only originals. So then the idea was like, let's pull out that Standing By song and finish it. So we quickly finished it. I went home, wrote that bridge part and everything, all the little ambient section and everything. The song was done, put it together. It was ready for Moodai, that sort of thing. So the chorus was Standing By, Standing By. So then it became BSB. And then they said it sounds like a pizza. And then they changed it to PSP when I told them that when I play this chorus, my pawn shakes. And then they became PSP, pawn shaking pawns, instead of by standing by. And then because it sounded like a pizza, that 12-inch was put at the end. Like, it's a weird story. It's one of those random events which just became a thing, I guess.
Yeah, and the song obviously took a life of its own after that. What you're telling us about the Rajiv going around on stage asking people for the lyrics sort of thing. It's such a zero thing, because I remember, so one of the things I admired about the band in its later days, when you guys used to get together for those one-off gigs, is that Rajiv would go off on one of his tangents talking about something random, and then the three of you would be very bored and just look to pass the time. One of you would come up with something, either you would play a little riff or Sid would play a little groove, and then before you know it, Rajiv is still talking about some nonsense, or whatever, and the three of you are back there playing something legit. And being in the audience, I can say this, everybody around me is like, is this an actual song? Is this a lead up to an actual song performance? And then you will smile or something, and you'll say, okay, enough of this nonsense, and let's get to actually playing something. And everybody's like, why did you do that? Why did you do that KLPD? Like, that sounded great. Why did you stop? Why did you not continue this? So yeah, so the reason I said that is from 2000, from that random incident, to 2015 or 16, whenever the last time you guys played was, I guess that tightness and band chemistry really didn't change all that much, did it?
No, it never really does, because even when we last played at NH7, I remember flying in from Singapore, and it was a series of connecting flights, and I finally got there 5 minutes before we were due to start the gig, and they had sound checked without me. So I came in, just dumped my thing, plugged in, and 1, 2, 3, gajang. Literally, that was like what it felt like. It may have been, I may have had a second to just go and wipe my face, of all the sweat, and start playing. But that's what it felt like, and it never really, felt weird or anything like that. It's just like you get back into it quickly. As long as the other guys know how the song goes, we are good to go. So certain things get written into your read-only memory, never to be erased. I think, like, you can wake me up in the morning, put a guitar, and go start playing Lucy or whatever. You can just start the gig in autopilot, and somewhere in the middle of the gig, you kind of take stock of what's going on in that sense. So that's a pretty cool thing. You can just get back with these guys and just plug in and make music.
And back in those days when Zero was taking off, and then Hook comes out, which was the second album, and you've become really popular on the local scene, what was your conception of where this band is going? Initially, you're a bunch of guys who just enjoy jamming together. You kind of do that. You say, let's make a band. You go, you form a band, then you write these originals. You do one album, you do a second album. Was there, in your young minds, a thought that, hey, we want to break through internationally? Or was there in your mind that gradual acceptance that, hey, no, this is kind of the limit of what the scene is? Just take me through that journey of thinking about what is this band's place in the world? What's happening?
I mean, for us, the whole thing was, we had certain goals. Like, the first goal was play Mood Indigo. We played Mood Indigo. Then we wanted to play Rang Bhavan. Then we played Rang Bhavan. Then we wanted to win Mood Indigo. Then we won Mood Indigo. Then we won Great Indian Rock. And after that, we said, I think we've done a fair amount on this competition thing. Now is the time not to take part in any of these. So we became one of those, pro bands at the college. They would call us to play and that sort of thing. And after a while, I realized that this is kind of as high as you can get in this particular, pecking order. And in order for us to break abroad at that point, first of all, we don't have the money or financial backing to actually support a tour at that time. It was frightfully expensive, which it probably still is in that sense. But we won a few competitions, and then, there was this thing about sending us overseas to some country and everything. But then there was always this thing that was communicated to us that you need to have the Indian element. So we had made many jokes about this whole Indian element. What is the Indian element? Like we are zero. Zero is an Indian invention. So, that's the Indian element. Is that enough for you? What do you want? You want us to wear lungis? What do you want us to do? So, and at that time, I think also slowly, maybe after that time, came the acceptance that you can still show your Indianness in your music and still be authentic. You won't like considered selling out just because you put some tabla on your music. Now the whole thing is to get it to fuse effortlessly. If it does, great. And if it doesn't, in a band like Zero, it never seemed like it was needed. We just played what we want to play, and the fact that we lived in India was Indian enough for us. We didn't found the need to add. And then as you grow older, obviously with Black Star Blues, those influences start creeping in. You hear a sitar, the Tanpura drone in the Renaissance Mission and stuff like that. It goes together, pretty well in that sense. So there was also a little bit of that sense like, okay, I think, it's kind of got to as good as it's going to get. And at that time, my parents had moved to New Zealand around 2003. And there was this, are you going to come? Are you going to stay there? That, parents they wanted me to obviously move along with them as well. So for around 1 or 2 years after they left, it was like a huge party scene. But then I also started kind of, feeling the wind down, like there has to be more to life than this. So then for me, it was like, okay, let's go there and see what that's all about, And then I went and I actually found a system that somewhat works. Everything was like a polar opposite of what you're used to in India. India is like too many people there. There's not enough people. There's very long lines here. There's not very long lines. So that's what I'm saying. I mean, you start noticing the contrast and everything like that. So then it became like, okay, maybe I should stay here for a while. And after a series of very, shall we say, fortunate events, I ended up getting my New Zealand residency because the thing was I had to reach here before I was 25 and I landed here on my 25th birthday, cutting it close. So anyway, finally I got it. And that was a sign like after all this, chakkar and everything, maybe I should stay here for a little bit. So I did a 6-month thing back in India where I packed up all my stuff because I'd come in initially on a tourist visa as you do. Went back, packed up all my stuff, and 2005 is when I was like, chalo, I'm going there. You guys want to see me for a very long time. So, it wasn't such like a, what do you call it, like a whole drama thing, like, I'm going, I'm leaving the band and all that kind of thing. It was like, no, listen, I've got to go and live in another country for a while. So, you guys carry on and we'll see, where things go. And I think I came back for a holiday in 2006. We played at one of the great Indian rocks at Pragati Maidan as one of the headlining bands and everything like that. So that was cool. As and when, there was no thing like, okay, now it's ended and now we're reuniting or anything. It's just like, no, we're in the same city. We play. We're not in the same city. We don't play. It's as simple as that. So that's kind of the whole thing with Zero, the way it currently is, at least till now.
And how were you kind of calibrating, what you were doing as a musician? Because, at one point you decided to be serious. You've spoken about how you were doing engineering, decided it wasn't for you, left at, you're a full-time musician, your families were supportive of that and all of that. Then Zero happens. Presumably you've got some ambitions for that, but you do as well as you can as a band. And the next thing, you're in New Zealand. There's a completely new ecosystem. You don't know anybody there. I'm guessing it's like totally different. What are you thinking of in terms of, the next 20, 30 years of your life? I mean, I know no one really plans like that, but were there moments of worry? Were there moments where you wondered if you'd made the right decision in terms of going to New Zealand? Obviously not in terms of music, or did you have second thoughts about that as well?
No, it was just I need to try something new. When you come to that point in your life, like things are starting to feel like samey and very old and, and stagnant in that sense. So you have to kind of do something, different to get to a different place in your life. So in that sense, it felt like the right thing. And, like a young kid who's never really been outside India, suddenly everything was like, wide open. I was like, well, you can actually listen to the sound of your guitar notes decaying into silence. That was a new thing for me. I could hear the note decaying, right? Because in India, obviously, where I lived in Bombay, noisy part of the city, it decays and then the autos take over. So, all these little bits of discovery were pretty cool. And my parents had this garage where my brother and me pooled our resources together and we set up a little studio. And I was putting down a few ideas, and he said, I've gotten pretty good at programming drums. Let me have a crack at it. So then he turned out some spectacular drum tracks. I was like, hang on, this is a cool opportunity for me to flush out all the unfinished ideas, because there were always these ideas which were like, in a half completed state throughout the Zero thing. Once in a while, the band guys would like get me to finish it, like Spitleaf or Christmas in July, and put it on an album. But those were like the precursor Black Star Blues tracks. So then there were tracks like Anuva Sky and So the Sky and everything like that, which were, incomplete. But because of this sudden, josh you get that, oh, suddenly it's sounding really good with this guy programming the drums. It became really easy. So then that flow got established. So I think I recorded that entire album in 3 weeks. It sounds nuts right now at my current state of, work. But in 3 weeks, I kind of had it wrapped up. But it was still so fresh that I didn't have the detachedness from it to mix it properly. The mixes never sounded, good. So that process took me like around a year and something to finish the mixes. And then finally it was at a point, okay, I can put this out. And then once it went out and people liked it, then it became, by the time the second album came around, enough people had liked it where like Mithibai College wanted to fly me down to play a gig. That became the first Black Star Blues gig in 2009. So there was like a 2 year period of that, just putting out stuff and seeing what happens. And I think I put it out for free. I had my website where there was a download link. And then, enough people heard it and they liked it. And that's how things grow.
And I'm intrigued by one aspect of your development, which has a sort of dual part to it. One is that you said in an interview once that the first thing you noticed about Auckland was that it was a lot quieter than Mumbai, and the silence opened up your ears in a new way, and you began to listen to music differently. And that's one thing. But the other thing is also, I think, something that inevitably happens with us as we grow older, where we kind of learn to take a step back and relax just a little bit and maybe get more comfortable in our skins and so on and so forth. Like you done an interview with Chuck, I think, around the time of the second Black Strat Blues album, where he asked you what you don't do well, and I think you said that sometimes I still overplay. And listening to your later albums and even those earlier albums, there's just a lot of restraint, a lot of chilling, and eventually, I guess, over time, you reach this stage where you become more and more comfortable in your own skin, where you're no longer worried about what you want to sound like. Am I living up to my own expectations, or am I living up to the expectations of others, or all of that, and you just get comfortable and you just let the music kind of take over. Like, brief digression, I remember my friend Prem Panikar once was doing a writing workshop for my students, and he told me this great story about a writer. Now I forget which writer it was, but this writer was asked about his writing process, and he said, okay, I get into the room and I sit with my typewriter and I close the door, and then I'm alone in the room. So the whoever was interviewing the guy asked him that, is that when you start writing? And he said, no, because there are still, even though I'm alone in the room, I can still sense all these other people around me whom I want to impress, or their expectations of me and so on. So I wait until they've all left. So then this person asked, oh, so that's when you stop writing? And the guy said, no, that's not when I start writing, because there is still one person in the room, and that's me. And I wait for that person to leave, and then the story takes over. Right. And I found it very resonant. Like when you, somewhere else in another interview, you spoke about Ode to a Sunny Day and how that came about. And how at the end of it, you were kind of surprised that, my God, I wrote this. Similar to when, Paul McCartney got Yesterday in a Dream, and he woke up and he played it and he said that, have you heard this before? Because he couldn't believe he had written it. It kind of came. So tell me a little bit about this, that have you become comfortable in your own skin? What was that process like? You told Chuck in that interview more than a decade ago that you overplayed. Do you still do that? What was that journey like?
I mean, for me, the best music comes when you become a conduit or an antenna. And you're just able to channel something or a feeling or whatever. It just goes through you. And as little of your own ego is applied to the process as possible. There are certain things you obviously do well, and there's certain things that you're kind of more inclined to do than other things. So that kind of shapes it. But as long as I'm honest to the song, you know, and not trying to bend it against its will, because you can do that to a piece of music. You can try to push it too far into something it's not intended to be. So I guess I grew a little better at knowing when I was doing that and then just back off a little bit. And the ability to take time and let something percolate in your subconscious for a while is pretty awesome, because now you're able to open a Cubase session, for example, and do a whole bunch of stuff in one day, like say do 6 hours of work. And then you don't listen to it for like 3 weeks, and then you come back to it. And then you have a little bit of a clearer insight about, oh, that take that out, that doesn't work, that sort of thing. Because when you get into a flow, you tend to like throw as much of it, into it as possible. And then you come back another day, and then that second person has to strip away the excess and kind of find what that little vein of gold inside the rock is, and then shine that out a bit and tend to make that the centerpiece of it. So it could be a melody, it could be a chord progression, it could be a drum groove, it could be a bass line, whatever it is. And at different types of the songs, there's different things that can do that. My main goal is to kind of keep myself interested in the process. And to start the process, I try to find an idea which has what I call legs. The idea is legs. It inspires me to do more, to get it out. And sometimes I can do too much, but I can always kind of come back to it, as long as things are not set in stone. The idea of collaboration also is pretty awesome with me, because the idea of handing something over to something like, say, a drum groove. Why the hell would I want to think of a drum groove when I've got someone like Jay or Cole who and also now I have, like, say, the ability to say, okay, this song is better if Jay plays it, or this song is better if Cole plays it, that sort of thing on this more last current album, which I found awesome. It was like, otherwise what you tend to do is you tend to shape the songs into what the band itself is. It's like, you've got a certain cast, and then this is the kind of material which is going to be best for them. Like with Zero, I would write in a very different way to what I would do in Black Star Blues, just because the members were different. So once you get used to delegating that and handing things over while still retaining the overall picture, the big picture of things, it's pretty awesome in that sense, because then the whole idea is also just freeing yourself of all these hang-ups. What is this one going to think? What is that one going to think? Right now, I'm at a point where as long as I play honestly and I play in tune and in time, as you would expect, the idea would get across. So I don't really want to fluff it up by putting too much into it just to show what I can do. At this point, it's like, nah, people know what I can do. So, I'd rather do what's best for the song.
It almost seems to me like there are two parts to you, and I'm not saying the pre-Zero, the Essence Zero guitarist and the Black Star Blues guitarist, but what you described right now was kind of fascinating. It's like there's a creator and there's an editor, almost, right? Like there's a creator part where you create, and then you come back and look at it with fresh eyes. Do you have like a different process, or like what are the things that you do to get into the respective grooves? Are there, or when do you know that you need to, how do you know when to step out of the creator mode and step into the editor mode, for example?
You don't like really hand off on one to the other, because there's still a little bit of that creator thing that has to inform the editor part as well. Because sometimes you can get too clever with the editing as well. So sometimes, don't polish that too much. It's better left, in its slightly raw state. That's kind of what was giving the thing its charm. So you have to be very sensitive to the aesthetic or the vibe or whatever you want to call it. There's obviously going to be a subjective thing, because I'll hear things differently than, a different person who's equally proficient. It's not a question of proficiency, it's just a question of taste. So very often there's no right or wrong. There's just different things. And at the end of the day, it comes down to what makes you happy at that point of time. Because what makes you happy yesterday may not be what makes you happy today. Just also depends how you're feeling, what the humidity is like, what the temperature is like, all that kind of changes the way you perceive a piece of music. I think the passage of time kind of helps me, at least, if I'm able to have enough time. Because when people ask me, when is the next album going to be out, I said, when it's ready. I don't know when it's going to be ready. And there's no one putting a gun to my head saying it needs to be out on so and so date. So then, why have an imaginary gun? Just wait till it's done. But then also, I guess the deadline kind of helps with the procrastination. So sometimes you have to set yourself deadlines. You have to have it done by this day, that sort of thing. Like this previous album, I uploaded it to streaming services 8 times. Every time I'd upload it, I'd hear it in the car. I was like, I got to change that, I'd pull it back down. And this 8 times happened in a week, you know. And by the time it came to the last upload, it was cutting it really fine. And they were saying, like, no, it won't be out by that day if you don't upload it today, that sort of thing. So it was like, okay, it's done. Let's put it out and see what happens. So it's ready when you have to let go. You keep on editing. That's also the thing is, like, in the early days, you had studio time. You had this much studio time. You had to go. You had to finish the thing and get out. Like there's that whole story of Led Zeppelin recording Presence in like a very short span of time because the Rolling Stones were coming in and they had to finish. And he did all his guitar overdubs in one night, which is amazing if you listen to that album and think all the guitar parts on that album were done in one night. So similarly, like, having a deadline can kind of push you, but I like to have a reasonable, window to move things around and see how things work.
Yeah, and what you said about stopping the editor inside you from polishing something too much reminds me of this quote by a guy called William Maxwell. He was an editor at the New Yorker for about 40 years and a great writer himself, wrote some crazy books. And once he was asked about what he looks for in the writing that people send to him, and he said, I don't look for style, I look for the breath of life. And he said this was something that he had learned to do over time, that it's not just about immaculate craft and all of those things. It's about, where is that kind of moment of magic. One thing I want to ask you about, which I've always wondered about in the context of both music and cinema, is the anxiety of avoiding cliche. For example, in writing, it's really common advice that you want to avoid cliches. Martin Amis, even his book of collected criticism is called The War Against Cliche. Now, in cinema and music, it seems a little harder than that, because where do you distinguish between, say, cliche and convention and trope? Like in a film, if you have an establishing scene, you'll have a wide shot, then you'll go in. Is it cliche? Is it convention? Is it just friendly to the audience to do it in a familiar way? Similarly, when you're playing music, I would imagine that there'll be tons of tropes which are, say, common to blues or common to a particular kind of vibe that you're doing. If there's a certain kind of melody, you'll mix it in a certain kind of way or whatever. And some things can even become your own cliches. So, is that something that you worried about at any point? The anxiety that, am I really doing something new? That where does one draw that line? Stuff you've thought about?
There's always anxiety. the whole the whole imposter syndrome looms large, but you kind of have to kind of almost be your own psychologist and tell yourself, no, I do this well, just relax, I'll do it. I know how to do this, just let me do it. So that part of you, has to be silenced, the one which is always like, no, it's wrong, no, it's wrong, no, it's wrong. Like, okay, you chill for a little while, let me just do it. And you can kind of feel when you have an honest reaction to your own music, to something that you make, and whether it is cliche or not, if the reaction you feel is tangibly genuine, then I don't worry about it so much, because sometimes you can do a certain thing which everyone has done, but you can do it in a way which is, sometimes it's like a parody. Like I played it ironically, something like that. Like in Zero, I would throw in like heaps of these little things, these little phrases. Like if you listen to the solo on Found, there's a lick from Santana from Europa. And there's one in the IIR guitar parts sound like Led Zeppelin, Your Time Is Gonna Come. I would just throw these things in to see like who would notice. And like sometimes after 20 years, someone would come and say, "Hey, that's amazing."
Yeah, and you were notable for doing this in live performances as well. Like
Live was a totally different thing. It was like, because at least on a recording, it's committing something to posterity. Live, at least then when no one was recording shit on their cell phones, you could do what the hell you wanted. I remember playing the solo from, what's that Metallica song? Fade to Black, Incomfortably Numb.
and which go very well together, by the way. There's actually a video where a guy superimposed one over the other. No, you would also do phrases from Tujhe Dekha To Ye Jana Sanam inside I and things like that. Yeah, it's quite.
That came about at some gig where people would ask us to play Bollywood. So I was like, this is all I know.
Right. Let's take a quick commercial break, and on the other side of the break, let's continue with your journey. Have you always wanted to be a writer but never quite gotten down to it? Well, I'd love to help you. Since April 2020, I've taught 20 cohorts of my online course, The Art of Clear Writing. An online community has now sprung up of all my past students. We have workshops, a newsletter to showcase the work of students, and vibrant community interaction. In the course itself, through 4 webinars spread over 4 weekends, I share all I know about the craft and practice of clear writing. There are many exercises, much interaction, a lovely and lively community at the end of it. The course costs rupees 10,000 plus GST or about $150 and is a monthly thing. So if you're interested, head on over to register at indiauncut.com/clearwriting. That's indiauncut.com/clearwriting. Being a good writer doesn't require God-given talent, just the willingness to work hard and a clear idea of what you need to do to refine your skills. I can help you. Welcome back to The Scene and the Unseen. I'm chatting with Warren Mendonsa and Chuck Gopal. I often wonder, should one say Deepak, should one say Chuck, but we'll just say Chuck.
Either will work, yeah.
Let's continue talking about Blackstrat Blues. Like, you have a whole bunch of albums and they're all pretty different. Like, the noticeable difference between Nights in Shining Karma and your second album, which was called The New Album, though one could argue all subsequent albums are newer. You know, like you yourself said somewhere else, that in that first album, the guitar is a hero, and you spoke about your process of kind of putting it together, your brothers laying down the drum tracks and you're just playing everything else. But by the second album, you're building soundscapes. The guitar is no longer the prominent thing. There's this whole vibe that's kind of happening. And through later albums, other interesting things happen. There are these Indian influences like the Tanpura drone and so on, or the tabla or whatever, coming in at different points in time. So what was your evolution during these years of the Blackstrat Blues, where it begins as a kind of a solo project, but then it becomes something more? So kind of take me through that process of, your evolution as a musician and of Blackstrat Blues as well at the same time.
Right. So the first album was pretty much my brother and me, like I said. By the time the second album happened, I had met a few other people. So the first guy I met was, who still is, he's one of my dearest friends here, a guy called Cole Goodley. So I'd gone to watch him at a gig. Actually, let me backtrack before that. When I first moved here, I needed to get a job right away. So it was at a local government organization. And I met another friend of mine called Emma. Now, Emma had some songs which I thought were really cool. So I said, let me help you put an album together. So we started recording. And then Emma said, I need drums on one song, but it has to be like a certain style. So we had gone to watch this gig and we came across this drummer, Cole Goodley. And he said, this is the perfect guy for that song. So at that time, I was working at a recording studio. I'd quit the day job. And I was able to use downtime. The studio owner was a very sweet guy, so he said you can use it whenever you want. So we used the downtime to record Cole. So Cole came over to the studio to record on Emma's song, and he did his takes very quickly. I think he had what we wanted, gave us a few options. That was done in an hour and a half. And then we had the rest of the evening. So then before he started putting his drums away, he started playing something. And then he went into Achilles' Last Stand, which is like one of my favorite Zeppelin songs. It's like, dude, just give me a second. I quickly grabbed the Les Paul, which was lying there, plugged it into the Marshall, and we started playing. And then it went on from that to like, oh, do you know this? Do you know that? And suddenly we found like a whole bunch of common influences, and a lifelong friend was made in one evening. So he said, hey, I'll play on your stuff if you want. And I was playing in some demos and everything. So he was like a huge contributor on that album, because I still think without his playing, the music would never have been, I wouldn't say as good or whatever, just wouldn't have been that, whatever it is that you hear. Because like on a song like "Oh to a Sunny Day," he understood exactly what was required. If you listen to that original album version, I still think is probably like the definitive version of that. Some people like the live one on Gear House and everything like that. But he brought a lot to the music. Whatever he played on it, just, when he heard Happy Billy song, he knew instantly I was doing a manic depression on that. So he just did the whole Mitch Mitchell thing. And he was very good at channeling those, influences like I do on guitar. Channel a Hendrix or whoever, but still kind of make it your own. So he was able to do that same thing on drums, which was awesome. It didn't sound like, it was a Hendrix song. It sounded like someone who understood Hendrix, but played what had to be played to make that thing come to life. Similarly, with "Oh to a Rainy Day," he heard that. I remember he picked up his sticks to start the take, and he said, right, I'll do my very best Nick Mason on this. and just listen to it. And he would like sometimes stop and start and everything, but he kind of did all the drums for that album in one day, which is kind of pretty amazing. It's all done in one day. And after he left, I still had some time before it like got too late. And I remember I was so like inspired by what we had just recorded. And I finished Happy Billy that same evening. Can you imagine like you spend a whole day recording drums and you still have some energy to put down all the guitar parts, edit guitars, whatever. So in that sense, the whole collaborative energy brought like a totally different thing to the music. And by the time of the second album, I had been living here for a while, so I'd kind of become accustomed to a little bit of a slower pace of life. Once the third album comes on, that becomes like another change altogether, because by then I had moved back to India. If you notice, because between the second and the third album, there's a good 6 years gap. So that was me getting accustomed back into, being a professional musician back in India and everything like that. So then by the time the third album came about, I had met Adi. In fact, Adi and me had played together long back at a gig where his band and my band had played together. And then the vocal mic blew. It was on a boat. The vocal PA blew. So it became an instrumental jam. So that there's a picture of that. I think I can share it with you later if you want. And so we knew each other and everything, but we never really played together as such. And then we had to play together at Ehsan and Roy's Coke studio. So that was the first time we spent a lot of time, because in between rehearsals and all, we were just sitting and jamming. I think at one point there was Prakash Sondake on pedal steel, who knows the whole Dark Side of the Moon, all the steel parts. And then Ehsan and Adi and I think Debu was playing drums. So like between rehearsals for that episode, we were only playing Pink Floyd. It was hilarious. So Adi and me started getting along at that point. And Jay, who had played on the very first Black Star Blues tour, but had never recorded on any of the albums. But I figured Jay and Adi would be a good, team together, because Jay is the guy who will push with serious energy, but Adi's the guy who will hold things back and ground it. So you have a perfect blend of those two, because if you have both guys pushing at the same time, it can blow out of control. The car will just go off the track. So one guy is the guy holding it back and had things. So that became a trio. And then as a trio, we recorded the third album. And I think we had also worked a fair bit with Karsh. So Karsh and Jay had split drum duties on that third album. Then the following year, I'd met Bevan on Clinton's Coke studio. So two Black Star Blues band members came from Coke studio. So Bevan, I used to drive with him for Clinton's rehearsals, and I was playing him like all the third album stuff and everything. So he turns to me and he said, "Hey, if you ever need a keyboard player, just let me know." And I was shocked, because like Bevan is like a seriously skilled musician, and to play with us jokers, like rock band jokers, I was like, "You will play with us?" And he said, "Yeah, I'll play with you." So that at that point, it became like, everything just fell into place, and you could kind of sense it. And then that's when that last Analog Generation happened, which I think is probably, after the second album, that's like my favorite one till now. So that point, it became a band, and then a lot of live gigs happened as well. So that kind of solidified the lineup. And then I put out an album called When It's Time, when I knew it was going to be time for that to wind up and make the move back. Because at that time when my kid was born, it was like, okay, you kind of have to stop thinking about yourself, and then there's another person that we have to consider making plans and everything like that. So at that point, it just became pretty evident that if a child is a New Zealand citizen, she should probably grow up in New Zealand. So at that point, it was a bit hard, because we had kind of done so many killer gigs and everything together. But again, it was kind of almost like a hark back to the Zero thing, where like, the band had solidified really nicely, but then you have to just say, then it was because of me that I moved, and now it was because of her.
Yeah, I'm also, another sort of area I want to explore is what the other influences around you, how that shaped your music. Like in one of your interviews you speak about how, during Ganpati you used to hear that drum beat, and later you hear the same beat in Black Sabbath, and you feel that there's sort of a commonality there. And in another interview, you at one point you said this quote that's stuck with me, where you said, quote, "I have an unproven theory that all forms of folk music are intertwined down to the pentatonic scale that exists in all cultures. After having worked with many Indian classical musicians, it's pretty easy to spot parallel threads to the music, and this makes collaboration a possibility. For me personally, it's a common areas found in rhythm percussion that are the most appealing." Stop quote. Like, the Ganpati beat and Black Sabbath perhaps. And equally, you've been a sessions player in a lot of film recordings and all of that. I think you've done a couple of Dance Masti albums. You've been Amit Trivedi's live guitarist. You've performed with, Ehsan Loy, Rahman, all of these guys. So you're not just any kind of blues musician. You've got a much wider array of influences than most people. Like I often tell people that anyone in India is by default luckier than the rest of the world in at least one way, which is that we are multilingual. In Europe, people will speak one language, we speak three, four languages. There's so much else coming in from there. And in a sense, in a musical sense, you've got that same sort of good fortune, not of just being surrounded by different kinds of music, but being able to listen to them and find these commonalities. So expand on this a little bit. Tell me about, what are these sort of different common elements? How has it shaped your music and so on?
Well, the pentatonic scale is definitely there in every culture. You can hear that. There's a nice video that Bobby McFerrin shows, where he kind of has a theory that it's part of our DNA. The pentatonic scale is part of our human DNA. So that's worth checking out. The 6/8 groove, you can hear that in every single culture. African, Celtic, American, Indian, tribal stuff, Asian music, you'll hear it. I mean, everywhere you go, you'll find that 6/8. It has to come. And that's kind of one of my favorite grooves. So you listen to a song like Focus 3, for example, that's kind of where I exploited that whole thing, that, which is like a, Visarjan kind of groove. But it's also like a blues shuffle, that 6/8 thing as well. So I love that. For me, it's like finding something that's pretty universal. Which again, most people would be able to relate. And then the fact that it's instrumental means there's no lyrics. So technically, it shouldn't prevent from anyone who listens to any kind of language to not be able to get it. But in terms of relating to other musicians, I think you kind of have to keep your ears open, because there's obviously some things they'll do in some particular rag which I'll have no idea. Then I'll have to kind of ask them, like, what exactly is going on? And there are only 12 notes, but how you use those 12 notes for infinite, combinations. And then you have to listen to things like microtonal inflections, how they bend into that note. There's another nice video, Derek Trucks, talking about Indian music and how it's common, like the microtones to gospel music in America. Wow. So that's worth checking out. I can send you a link. But every time I find something like that, it just makes me feel like warm and fuzzy inside, like there's something common among us all as humans, which it doesn't matter where you were born, you still can, have you gone to a place where nobody likes Bob Marley? Go to any beach town, there's some form of that music which is playing. So I don't know. I just think the ability of the whole genre thing is basically a marketing construct. It's basically people want to sell things in certain boxes, so it has to be. Would you call Led Zeppelin a reggae band just because they had a reggae song? No, they were just Led Zeppelin. You could say they were a rock band. So similarly, I wouldn't really consider myself a blues musician. I think I have like a lifetime to live as a blues musician to be classified as one. I love the blues. I love where it comes from. I love also expanding it. I think like early Cream, they did cool things with the blues, where they would like taking traditional forms and kind of, making it a little bit more of its time. So I like artists who do that, who take from traditional forms and are able to, do something different with it, where you can retain, where it's coming from, but it's not that where it's coming from. It's something else.
One of the questions that I wanted to ask was, so you spoke about how you're a fan of artists who take something with an existing genre and add on to it. And that's really how music evolves, right? So have you seen any of that happen recently? Like, for example, you can argue that rock is now a rock and heavy metal are now traditional forms of music in some sense, like how the blues and early rock and beat music was. I've come across some artists doing fascinating things. Like an artist I came across recently is called Carpenter Brute, who takes traditional heavy metal and adds a lot of influences from electronic music. So it's basically just him. It's basically a metal DJ on stage. And while I may not be a complete fan of things like that, I think that pushes music in different directions, even if it makes some people slightly uncomfortable. I saw this at a metal fest, so it obviously alienated the audience a fair bit. Have you come across any examples like this? And like, just generally, where do you think music, especially the types that we love so much, where could it go? Do you see like more of a role of traditional scales and instruments, for example, around the world? I've come across music, like I was just telling Amit before our recording. I came across something called Torek guitar, which is North African psychedelic guitar, and you would love this absolutely, with bands with artists like Umdu Mukhtar, if I've got the pronunciation right, who play a very Hendrix like fuzz sound, but with what is unmistakably Arabic influence, or that or North African influence of sorts, or like Tinariwen. Have you come across any like this, and what do you think about stuff like this? Like, where do you think at least the music that we like, rock and metal, could go?
For me, like for example, if I hear a bit of Hendrix, I'm immediately drawn in, because that's like such a there's not, like, if you ever in doubt about what to play on guitar, do a Jimmy. It'll work. For most, that's also like one of the things that keep, like, I know certain things will work, so like you said, like, it sounds a bit like that Hendrix fuzz thing. That's kind of like a universal sound now, like any guitar player across the world knows what Hendrix sounds like. There's a really nice band from Sweden called Dunyan. So it's spelled Dungen. They sing in Swedish, but doesn't really matter because the music is amazing. Yeah. Guitar player is like a little bit of a, you can hear the Hendrix influence, but he's also like totally his own guy. So that's another thing which, you can take the similar sound like that Hendrix fuzzed out psychedelic guitar sound and do different things with it. So I would recommend checking out, there's one album called Ta Det Lunt, Lugnt. So I think that's their second or third album. And there's one album called Four. If you listen to that Four album, there's one killer song called Mina Damer Ok Fasana. I'm pronouncing it horribly, but whatever, you can, from my, you can kind of get the spelling. So this song, you can hear that fuzzed guitar thing, but it almost sounds like Arabic or Indian in a slightly Bollywood way. It goes something like that, and the groove is, man, like this fat ass, like something like that, So then, you can hear like different influences, but it's coming together in such a unique way, which just sounds like that and nothing else. Again, which brings you back, like you hear a little bit of the commonality in it, but it's something totally different, which you've never heard before. And that, like, is what I live for. Have you ever heard of this guy called Josh Fix by any chance?
Josh Fix? No, I haven't.
So this guy, I think he came out in 2004 or 5. And he had this album called, I'll send you the name later, but it sounded like Queen, Elton John, that kind of thing, piano-driven rock. But the production is immaculate. Like you can't help but not like it. And he found quite a few fans in, like, say, Steve Lukather and, prominent musicians. And then he had an EP after that with the most killer name, This Town Is Starting to Make Me Angry. So one great album, one amazing EP, and then you never heard of him again. He just disappeared. And I guess he kind of grew disillusioned or whatever, and that's only something I'm speculating. But with an artist like that, you can again hear, where he's coming from very clearly. But again, it's so uniquely him, like just the way things are put together. So that can be a facet of your originality, the way you put things together from styles that have come from you. So you can take things that are very, like, almost universal in a way, but combine them in a certain way, which, I guess people have been doing that in every genre for the last 20 years.
So I want to get back to a question that we touched upon right at the start, which is, the question of form and content, how they affect each other. Like, every form that we kind of have came because of a physical reason. You could only fit so many minutes of music on an LP, and therefore that's your album length. Or a radio will typically, they'll play a 3 minute this thing, and therefore that becomes kind of a standard. Today, you'll find bands optimizing for the first 30 seconds on Spotify because you got to make the guy finish 30 seconds. When advanced mics first came about in the 1920s, people started singing differently. Bing Crosby could whisper into the mic and didn't have to sort of throw his voice. Today, record labels will ask artists to have that 15-second catchy bit which TikTok or Reels can pick up. And what has happened is that we somehow, as creators, and I'm talking across everything, not just music, we get stuck in old formats. Writers will only think of 800 word pieces or 100,000 word books, or filmmakers will think in terms of like a 24-minute TV episode or a 90-minute Hollywood film, and so on and so forth. But in many fields, those formats don't matter anymore. The reasons why they came about in the first place are they don't matter, they've gone. And in music, you've got new imperatives, like sort of the one that we discussed. Now, what has happened is that many of these formats have become cliches or formulas. So I got this video on YouTube where this guy was analyzing the formula for a perfect pop song, which was 114.2 beats per minute, 3 minutes 59 seconds long, moderately danceable, in the key of C major, and so on and so forth. There's another video that breaks down what Max Martin does, where your chorus will start between 40 seconds to a minute, your lyrics will be below fourth grade reading level, simple harmonic structures, short, unique intros, because many people are, kind of, if you're a DJ changing tracks on a loud this thing, the intro has to be catchy for people to stay on the dance floor, and so on and so forth. So all these formulas have evolved, and they've evolved because of, one, commercial imperatives, because obviously labels will look at what is successful and just want to repeat that, and that becomes a formula. Two, it's because we've gotten used to a particular kind of form. So you think, oh, every song has to be 3 minutes or 4 minutes or whatever that so-called optimal length is. And three, because of the way our brains are wired. As you said, all our brains are wired in the same kind of way. Something will sound musical to us, something else will not sound musical to us. So in some senses, you're kind of catering to how our brains are wired, and you kind of therefore slip into those same old grooves. So what is your sort of thinking about this? Because one of the things you mentioned that Auckland allowed you to do, for example, just going there, and maybe it's just a part of maturity of any artist or any person, is that you're able to sit back and re-examine all of this, and your role in all of this and all of that. So what do you think about all of these things that Chuck, in an old piece, had in fact written about your stuff, where I'll quote Chuck now. There's something in his compositions that move from familiar intro to slow part where people can soak it in and notice how good the other musicians are, to faster part when the pace picks up, to epic ending when everyone goes berserk. Fuck, how good is everyone in this band? That just works with any audience. And he continued elaborating on that. So what is your sense of that? Because I guess when you start without even thinking about it, without even thinking, oh, this is a formula, this is what I need to do, you just gravitate to that. But then later on, you've tried many different things and different structures. So tell me a little bit about how you sort of think about all of this.
Yeah, I mean, for every song that fits that formula, there's also another one that doesn't. So it just depends upon which are the ones that you latch on to. The thing is also, you have to keep in mind: are you making music for mass consumption, or are you doing it for your own gratification? I do it currently because I want to make myself happy. Now, the moment the commercial consideration comes into mind, I may have to change the way I do it. At this point, at least, I'm still able to at least make the music I want to, and still have a roof over my head. But that could change, another day, and then I may have to totally, retweak. Maybe I have to do 30-second songs or whatever. I mean, I worked in advertising for a very long time, so I know how advertising music works. And there is definitely like a certain formula that has to work in context. Like, it can't get in the way of the voiceover, for example. That's like the golden rule. Otherwise, they will pull it down. The music track gets pulled down and the voiceover is on top of everything. That VO is God. So with confirming to certain parameters, now obviously the parameters you confirm to when you make music for yourself are your own preferences. You like things to sound a certain way, and I'm a little bit old, so I still want to make an album rather than, a TikTok reel. It may just change. Like my daughter may suddenly say, "Dad, make me a song which is 30 seconds." I'll make her a song, man. I want to see her happy, so I'll do it. That sort of thing. So I'm never gonna like discount like saying this is the right way or that is the wrong way. Everything is like at this point in my life, everything goes. You see what you like and you latch onto that. And there's so much music out there. So let's, try to keep ourselves happy by listening to music we like. Apart from that, the attention spans are different these days. So, where a double album would be something that people could consume in one sitting. In this day and age, I don't think a majority of people, even I find myself like there are certain times in the, like once everyone's gone to bed, then I can put on an album and listen to it entirety. And these days also I find like I'll just not, do something else. Like I'm always like something or the others there that, like in my room, I'll be cleaning up something or something while doing it. But at least my musical attention is focused on what's playing, in that sense. So for me, it's like, again, the trick is to keep finding music that makes you feel that way. It's like a drug, the old stuff. There'll be certain music which no matter how many times, like my daughter now is into the Beatles. So I listen to Blackbird in my car literally 9 or 10 times on repeat. And I don't have a problem with that. It's a cool song. So no worries with it on repeat. So the people who are making music by formula, I have no problem with them doing that because that's what they have to do at that point of time. So, if you write for Bollywood, now the director becomes your god. You have to cater to his whims, and the director, whoever's paying you, has to be happy. Then everyone is happy, And then it becomes like that approval by committee. That's the process I hate the most because everyone feels they have to give some feedback, otherwise their job is not warranted. They're just sitting there like useless people otherwise. So that is not something that I'm personally fond of in that sense. At least I want to be able to, at least with my own music, if I put it out under like Warren Mendonsa or Black Star Blues, at least I want something that, goes out with me being happy. And then there's a good chance of other people being happy as well by default.
Like you mentioned short attention spans. 5 years back when I started this podcast, my impression was that attention spans are short. You got to hook them in the first 15 seconds, don't do an episode more than 10-15 minutes, and so on and so forth. And I realized I was spectacularly wrong because tons of people crave deep content. And especially in the case of podcasts, people are a captive audience when they're listening to podcasts, they're commuting or working out or whatever. They're listening at higher speeds, which of course doesn't happen with music, but they're listening to podcasts at higher speeds. And people just crave depth. Nobody else gives you depth. And like you said, there are times of the day when you have a short attention span, but there are times where you really want to sit down and listen to that double album. And this was something I realized. But the question I'm coming to is this, that what I have noticed is that for content that goes deeper, your absolute numbers may not be as high as something that is shallower and something that is hooking you in 15 seconds and all that. But the level of engagement is way, 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 way higher. Your audience cares so much more about you. It's personal, it's intimate, all of that is happening. So the dual question to you is that both as a consumer of music and as a creator of music, have you felt that connect? That, when you're doing stuff that makes you happy, I think you're automatically guaranteed perhaps to not reach out to as many people as you would, but to everyone you reach out to, you're making them happy as well. So, do you feel that deeper connect both from your listeners towards yourself and also from you towards the music you like, that you just feel this more intimate connection towards this person?
Yeah. I mean, for me, when I meet people who I've never met before, but they tell me like, I really, love the music you do. There's part of me which is like that Rush song Limelight. Like I can't pretend a stranger is a long lost friend. That part of me is like, there's nothing real about this interaction if I have never met you before. But I have to shut off that part of me and say, this person is actually connecting to me as a human being because they first connected to my music. And the whole idea of having like Black Star Blues as a moniker or a project name was just to say, okay, this is the music. Now you listen to the music and you leave me alone. I'm not part of this whole relationship. Your relationship is between you as a listener and the music, not between you and the listener and me as the person. Maybe me as a musician. Yeah. but there has to be that disconnect. And then you have like social media and everything come in where that line gets a bit blurred. And then I guess also like being a dad, I've kind of become less of that. It doesn't really get to me because like there's a certain kind of social awkwardness I have in any situation. If I don't know someone, it's very hard for me to relate to them unless they say like if they start talking about the Beatles, automatically like they become my friends. I mean, if I know that they know what they're talking about, that's something I like. I like when people are actually interested in something. They can talk about anything as long as they're actually interested in it and they have a proper knowledge of it. And there are people who just like to fill the air with conversation, with meaningless conversation. I can't deal with that. So sometimes at social gatherings, like I have to kind of hide behind my wife and that sort of thing. So even in these situations, like after gig, I make it a point to stay back and talk to everyone who wants to talk to me. So if they feel like connected to me as a person, who am I to say that's not real? In that sense. So it's progressively become easier over the years for me to do that. Like initially, I remember that gig where Chuck first came at Mithibai College, there were people taking photographs. And he wanted to take photographs of me. I was like, no, I don't feel comfortable doing this. Please let me just play on stage and go home. That's what I want to do.
And to quote your bassist from that gig, you tried to introduce the band. You did a pretty bad job of it. And Bobby grabbed the mic and said, as you can all see, Warren is very new at this mic business. What he means is, can all of you come forward? I still have a video of that. That was pretty hilarious. But yeah, your banter skills have improved dramatically since then.
Well, someone just asked me once, what was the biggest difference between Black Sun Blues and Zero? I said, well, in Zero, I didn't have a mic in front of me. That was amazing. The moment I hear my voice on the monitors, I instantly feel awkward and then I just start mumbling and then it becomes worse because then I'm just like talking like that. No one can understand what I'm saying. I remember one gig, they delayed our sound check severely. So I was super pissed off because it was early in the morning. I was like, listen, don't call a band for like a 7 o'clock sound check. If you can't meet that requirement, just call them and say, come later. But that wasn't the case. So I was damn pissed off by that and we got on stage. And apparently that was the best I've ever been behind the mic. We played like a smashing set because everyone was pissed off. And apparently I was very loud and audible because our front of house engineer told me you didn't have to keep pushing up my fader. So in fact, I had to pull it down. He was shouting on the mic.
Well, so my question for you, Chuck, was this: that the same thing what I asked him. You were actually one of the early big fans of Zero and Warren and so on and so forth. So what connect did you feel like? Like, do you feel there's something to that? Do you feel, for example, that a fan of someone like Warren or a similar musician or whatever will have a deeper engagement than, say, a fan of somebody more popular? I don't want to be disrespectful to someone by taking names, but say a Justin Bieber. Do you feel that the connect would be, that connect would be broader but shallower?
Yeah, 100%. I think it'll definitely be broader and shallower. I'll answer, I mean, there were multiple questions there, right? So I'll answer what drew me to Warren's music for the first time, and I won't embarrass you too much over here. I think I've done that enough through all the articles and stuff that I wrote. I think I was just blown away by the fact that an Indian musician could make guitar solos like this, honestly. And of course the band themselves, the songs by themselves were pretty great. So I was just blown away by that, and from there I wasn't an early fan of Zero. I would actually call myself one of the later fans of Zero and an early fan of Black Star Blues, because I gotten it around that time. I actually discovered Zero when Warren was out of the band and was in Auckland at that time. So I was right bang in the middle when that transition happened, and that blew me away, that you can do this and this at the same time. And I think that's what really drew me in. And arguably, if you had continued playing the way you did as Zero, maybe I wouldn't have been as much of a fan, because I think that transition and the fact that you balance both so effortlessly was important to me. To the second question, yes, there's no doubt about it. I think there is something about fewer fans but deeper engagement. Again, something that we discussed so much on when I came on, when I was talking about the Australian band Neo Blizzardis, for example. I think it is there. I think if there is a deeper connect, not only will they be evangelists for the music more, but, and Warren, you can correct me if I'm completely off the mark on this, but also be willing to support you more for this, either by spreading the music, buying the music, as opposed to streaming it on Spotify, etc. That's my feeling as a fan, and I've done that for artists that I am a supporter of. So yeah, that's my perspective on that.
Yeah, the guys who like it really like it.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that for
Sum it
sure.
up that way. Yeah.
Because there have been guys who have been listening from the first album. I remember this one guy at the time where I put it on my website for free, and I said, "This is my PayPal account. If you feel like donating some money so I can buy some better recording gear, then feel free." So one guy donated $200 at the time, which was like, wow. So that guy wrote back to him. I said, "Dude, thank you so much. Like, this has really come at a good time. Uh, you get the album advance release for free for life." So I make it a point now before
Wow,
every
that's so nice.
release, I send him a copy. I say, "Here you go." So I never really forgot that gesture of his. But there have been people who have been there from the first album, like Chuck, who still are listeners and support the music. So I'm really grateful for that. I mean, I cannot be more thankful. But the whole thing is like when you have people who don't see your music as a disposable commodity,
Yeah.
then you kind of feel that interaction is a little bit more real. Otherwise someone is just listening to Black Star Blues because their friends said they're a cool band and tomorrow they've forgotten about it. I mean, these are not the people that tend to, engage long term with your brand or your music or whatever. So I'm really grateful for the people who really like it enough. Like when I put out this most recent album, I put it on sale for Bandcamp first, and then it went on to streaming 2 weeks later. And it pretty much covered the entire recording cost of the album. I was like, wow, really, I wasn't expecting that at all. But it kind of made me feel like nice and warm about the whole thing, that there are people who actually care about your music. Then even if they know they're going to get it for free on streaming services on YouTube or whatever, they'll still take the effort to support you and put their money where their love for the music is.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about the commercial aspect a bit because one of the areas, like you talk about the high engagement, and where that directly leads is that today creators are able to connect directly with whoever's reading them or listening to them or whatever, and monetize some of that, capture some of that value, because anyone who listens to your music is in a sense paying for it, because time is money. You spend 1 hour listening to Blackstrat Blues, you're spending it. And today we are in that unique age where you don't have to go through intermediaries like platforms and advertising and so on. You can capture some of it. And I've had this experience when I opened up support for my podcast as well, and was very touched by a response I didn't expect, which has been enough to kind of keep me independent all this while and doing what I do. When things started going well for you, Blackstrat Blues happened, all that happened. I mean, in a musical sense, commercially there was so much flux that the revenue models of the music industry kind of were going through this crazy flux. All the labels come, they sue Napster and all that, they get that shut down. Then iTunes comes and there's nothing they can do because Apple has more lawyers and so on, as Ted Joya says, and everything kind of goes to hell. And you do this very interesting thing where you say that, look, I just want my music to reach people. I want people to listen to it. You put it up for free, and your first 2 albums are out there. They're up for free. How have things evolved since then? Because the downside of all of this, it seems to me, is that creators are also forced to simultaneously be entrepreneurs, right? Someone may be a talented musician, but they may not have a head for business or a head for how to use social media and so on and so forth, and be able to do the rest of that. So how have you therefore handled all of that, in terms of, sure, you make stuff for yourself and that makes you happy, but you also have deeply committed fans and so on and so forth? How has it evolved so far? Where do you see it going from here? And do you think for musicians in general, how should musicians in general approach this new world that we are in? Like 30 years ago, the model would have been that maybe you tour a little bit, build a bit of local following, attract a record label comes out, and either you're lucky enough to make it big, or you're back to whatever, being a journeyman band. Today that's really kind of different. So take me through a little bit of this landscape, and what are your thoughts on it and so on.
Well, the cost of recording has been coming down significantly due to the advance of technology. So that's the first thing we need to look at. So by the time I did the first Blackstrat Blues album, my recording costs were literally nil because I'd already owned all the equipment I needed to make that album. Now, obviously, now as an artist, you sometimes tend to grow in the scope of what you're trying to achieve and what you're trying to capture for posterity. So then, say tomorrow you decide you've written a piece of music that requires an orchestra. Now, that is not something I can record in my bedroom. I can program it, to a certain extent, but it's not going to sound like an orchestra. Now you have to decide. Now, if I have to have that orchestra, then the money's got to come from somewhere. So either I put it in myself or I have to apply for funding. At least here, the New Zealand government is awesome about that. They have funding avenues that you can apply for. I mean, the competition is severe, but you can if your music is deemed good enough and commercially viable enough. So there is some gatekeeper in that sense. The moment your personal investment is exceeded by the cost. So for me personally, as long as I was able to produce the albums to the best of my financial and artistic ability, I was happy with it. It was cool, because the first album, no recording cost. Second, I was able to use studio downtime, so got away with that. Third album, we recovered our investment on studio time from iTunes sales. Now, that time you could actually sell music on iTunes and OK Listen and all these sites where people were actually paying 100 rupees or whatever. And if, say, 1,000 people bought your album at 100 rupees, that's what, like 1 lakh, which at that time was kind of what our recording cost was. So we were pretty cool there. We were still making most of our music as a band, playing live. But even that wasn't enough to, sustain a life in Bombay. I had to play with Vishal Shekhar and Amit Trivedi and A.R. Rahman and stuff. That I enjoyed doing that totally because that was a totally different aspect of being a musician, But that is what kind of kept things alive in terms of having a lifestyle and being able to afford that. Now, the moment that's gone with the whole pandemic thing and everything, and I've now moved back here, it becomes a little bit more of a juggle, and you kind of have a more short-term budget in terms of making sure your mortgage payments are met and so on and so forth. So as long as you're above that, I can continue to do what I do. Now, there's also a lot of commercial music that I've been involved in, which is kind of what still, pays the bills. And then I mix stuff for other people. I do guitar sessions and stuff like that. So as long as, those two sides are juggled, it's like our heads are above the water. The moment that doesn't happen, anything could change. I mean, the world we live in right now is just like every day something new is happening. And like the life that we knew 6 months back is gone. It's something else. You got to do this, and then it becomes the norm. So again, till I guess this COVID thing stabilizes a bit, and then we actually have a stable income stream. You kind of have to, for me, teaching has really helped because during the moment the gig stopped, I was like, look, I've got like 3 or 4 months before I've got to move to New Zealand. So, I might as well find something to do with the time. So then I started teaching on Zoom. And like that kind of paid for the whole move. The whole moving costs and everything were met with by just teaching. So that again fluctuates up and down. I think every time there's a lockdown, the amount of students goes up, and every time things open up, it goes down as people find other things to do. I mean, I still have a few students that have stuck around for since I started teaching. So it's a bit of a very up in the air kind of thing, and you're trying to make sense of random events and sequences of things happening, and all you have to do is kind of manage to keep the bike balanced. Anything could happen. One, you could hit a stone, but if you hit a stone, then you kind of regain your balance, and as long as you keep the bike on 2 wheels and don't fall down, it's all good. So when that happens, then you cross that bridge when you come to it. So it's very hard actually to make long-term plans at this point. You have to be flexible enough to kind of just adapt to what every day brings. That's one thing I guess the pandemic has taught me, just every day is a blessing. So you don't know if you're going to be around tomorrow. Let's do the best we can. And in terms of the actual stuff that you make as an artist, that's going to survive long after you've bounced from this planet. So, that's something at least you put all of your current available energies into to at least kind of leave something. And now at least I have a daughter, so that's something else that will survive me, But it's like you just do the best you can every day, man. It's like so hard to, I'm the last person that will actually give you, concrete advice and say this is what you should be doing, and this is, invest your money here, don't invest. I don't know all that sort of thing. It's like as long as you get to play guitar tomorrow, that's a good thing.
Tell me a little bit about teaching, because one of the, when I started my writing course and I started teaching, I realized that I actually started learning more and looking deeper into a subject I thought I knew pretty well, right? So, how has teaching changed your appreciation of music, and has it actually changed you as a musician and just the way you think of the work you do?
Yeah, I've become a better communicator of ideas. I'm able to edit my, thought process really quickly, and, because sometimes I can be thinking of five things at once, but then that person doesn't have the time to listen to all five. So you have to pick the best thing that you're thinking of and communicate that. Um, yeah, I've had to kind of actually study what I do, because sometimes they ask me to, like, how did you play that? And I can't say I closed my eyes and it came out, which is actually the truth. But you have to kind of go back and deconstruct the process, even though that was something you were never thinking about at the time. So you kind of have to go back and trace your steps and say, okay, well, what was I thinking of when I played that? Kind of trying to give them an idea of my headspace, because that's very important to whatever it is I played. There's no chance I would have played the same thing if I was feeling it, differently. So, and then the whole idea of communicating how to channel emotion and vibe into what you're playing becomes tough. Then you start having to tell them more about the technicalities, like, okay, this is not in tune and that is not in time and that sort of thing. So, and a lot of people, I think, also tend to disregard simplicity. When my thing is like, look, it's the hardest thing to actually play simple things well, because there's nothing to hide behind. You got to have full conviction in whatever it is that you're playing. If you're playing like three notes that span this much of time, so you have to, be able to communicate that to someone in that sense, like saying, take it easy. We'll do it one step at a time, because they always want to, like, learn the complicated stuff at first. And I've said, I used to enjoy listening to complicated music, but I never thought that I would actually play it. Now is the time I go back and learn those solos, which I always admired, like Steely Dan and stuff like that. Now is the time I'm able to do that, when I can actually have the faculty to take it apart and then learn how to play it. So I never set my sights too high in that sense. I set my sights on like low hanging fruit, and learned how to, capture it really well. Once I was able to do that well, then I was able to go to the next stage and start, getting all that stuff. So like I have to tell them, like, look, it's fine. Just do simple stuff well. We'll deal with that, later. It kind of reinforces your own taste as well, because it's also like giving someone the reassurance that you'll get there sometime. Just put in the time. Very few people actually have the time that is required to get to the level they have in mind. So I was like, let's just aim at getting better. So that, and then because you're doing that, you notice like certain things in my own playing which I would find to be like weaknesses. I was never able to use this finger that well, but then you can't tell someone, look, you have to use that finger, and then not be able to do it yourself. So first you have to learn how to do that. And then someone's like, how do I alternate pick this? And I can't say like, look, dude, I can't play that. So I show them how to play it slowly and say like, well, now you have to just sit and ramp up the speed. And if I do that, I'm going to get better. Because sometimes I can find like, the certain exercises I give the student, I practice it during the week. So when we meet again, we're both like, okay, we've both practiced. Okay, now let's see where we are at.
Oh, that's remarkable. Like almost like musical first principles in some way. What you were talking about, just going back to the headspace. It's not the complex stuff. It's not the scales. It's not the theory, but it's more about the vibe, the understanding. Yeah, musical first principles. Like I said, it's kind of feels that way. Sorry, that was just a visceral reaction to what you just said.
There was one guy I remember, like he suddenly became better when I told him only play when you're exhaling. Don't play when you inhale. Because he was playing a lot. He was trying to do too much. And I said, okay, now look, when you breathe, there's a inhale process. And I said, no, you spend first, do that, and now you play. So suddenly felt like, okay, there's more like, intent in what he was playing. The intent is the hardest thing. I mean, you can't fake it,
Mm.
And if you keep on thinking of yourself as like, I'm never going to be good, I'm never going to be good, sometimes it can kind of cripple you and you'll never get there unless part of your brain says, no, I can do this. Because like there are things that I'll be able to play if I'm not thinking about it. But when I think about it, there's like that critical thing that comes in, like saying, oh, you're fucking it up, you're fucking it up, you're fucking it up. it automatically makes things go to shit. So you have to find a way of telling that guy, shut up. Be quiet. Go sit in the other room for 2 minutes. Let me just do this.
Yeah, in cricket, there's a term called the yips. In sports, in fact, there's a term called the yips where people just freeze at something that they've done so well before. I think famous example is Yana Novotná was playing a match in the mid 1990s sometimes, and she was 5-0 up in the last set, and she just lost. She just froze. She couldn't do it. And the theory behind that, there's a famous Malcolm Gladwell essay on this also. The theory behind that is that there's stuff that we've just internalized. It's reflexive to us. We do it easily. But if you start thinking consciously about it, you're just not able to do it because that's a different part of the brain and it becomes a problem. And I want to therefore ask you about processes, right? Just in terms of processes, whether it's processes in terms of practicing your playing and learning, whether it's processes in terms of songwriting, what are your processes like? Are there sort of hacks that have worked for you in terms of, getting into flow, as they say, where the song just plays itself? And like you mentioned, that sometimes your student will ask you about how did you play that? And at the time you played it, you weren't thinking, right? So is it easy to get into that kind of state where you're just in the groove and things are happening? Do you have routines, processes, ways to work towards it? Like one of the things that is common advice for writers to give is that you cannot wait for inspiration. It's all about getting your ass down on the chair and just working at it. It's never easy. It's always hard work, right? So and you can balance that out with that thing that sometimes you can get into flow when everything just happens easily and it's just kind of happening by itself. So what are sort of your thoughts on this?
For me, the sound has to be right, for me to be able to loosen up. Because the moment my guitar sound is not happening, it shuts me down like boom. And I have to just struggle my way, because there's sometimes at some gig, like the amp's not functioning well and everything. You can only do so much. So you kind of have to say, sorry, audience, I know you paid money to come and see me today, but I'm just going to have to struggle through this and do the best you can. And some days it's just like your feet are almost off the ground throughout the gig, Like there was one gig I remember at Hard Rock Cafe in Pune. It was NH7, and all the other stages shut off one by one. And everyone started filtering into this gig, which was actually like one full-on low public thing. But then it became like, a full house and everything. So that gig, it was like the moment I got on stage and I hit the first note, it didn't matter. There was like 10 or 20 people in there to start. It just sounded so good. I was like, okay, no, I'm going to have a good gig. It's just like you're hearing everything clearly, that sort of thing. Now, when I'm writing, it could, sometimes I could come up with something really quickly. Sometimes I have to just massage it a few different ways. And I don't really sit down to write a song, usually. I sit down to complete a song. But that writing, that initial idea, that spark, or the idea that has legs, that I said, it can come anytime. Sometimes you're in the bathroom and you start hearing a melody in your head. I can't shut that off, by the way. If there's something playing in my head, it just goes on. And while I'm sleeping at night, it goes on and on and on. And I can hear it in the dreams sometimes. It's so weird. I'm like, fucking here also, it's gone. Like, leave me alone for now. So, and then like, especially if it's like a musical problem, like now you want to solve this problem, then the bloody thing just keeps going ding, 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 ding in your head. And you create like almost like 500 different permutations and combinations of what it could be. So that subconscious process, I still haven't, come under full understanding of what it does. There are a few studies, like one is called This Is Your Brain on Music or something like that. There's another guy called Anil Seth, who is a professor of consciousness. And he had a TED talk, which I was watching, and it found it pretty fascinating. So I put his words in a song called Anesthesia, which was like, the anesthesia is like this. It basically shows you what is consciousness, that sort of thing. When does consciousness stop? Where does it, end? All that kind of thing. So I find that a fascinating subject, but there's parts of my brain which I still don't understand, how it works and that sort of thing. I know what I like, so I try to set up the process. Like I have a template that I've made in Cubase, like everything is connected in a certain way. So if I want to start writing, I can start doing that pretty quickly. I can pull up a drum track. I find it sometimes it works. If you're stuck, you put on a loop or something like that. That can tend to flow that. And sometimes just jamming with other people. That's like the best thing for me. Like the most creative I'm in is with other people in the room who are on the same wavelength as you are musically. There was one song, Focus 3. I wrote that just before I left New Zealand to come back to India 2011. And my friends had organized this little jam, and we were playing, and then we had some stimulants that were part of the the evening and everything like that. So there came to a point like where three of us were jamming, and it sounded so good. I almost felt like myself like levitate off and see us from above. It was so weird. I mean, like you're connected with the instrument and everything, but it's almost like you're looking at it from like 5 feet higher than you are. Like the only time that it was like a tangible experience like that. I don't know if the stimulants had something to do with it or whatever. So the funny thing is, I remember that exactly how it went. And so when I came back to India, I remember I'd done this gig with Ehsan at the Garden of Five Senses in Delhi. And I had to do a song of my own. And Jay was playing drums and Loy was playing bass. I was like, hang on, I wrote this riff. Let's just, see where that goes. And there was a Sarangi player, Suhail from Advaita. And he started singing something on top of it because I think the idea was to have him to collaborate with us on that song. And then I think Loy shaped it a little bit differently. So that whole, process took a very tangible idea, which is something I'd almost completed, but he shaped it in a very cool way. So then, I kind of wrote a little thank you to both of them for, their help in those melodies. So that's where you kind of hear a little bit of that Indian influence and, that kind of thing. But the collaborative thing is also like you need to be with people who, like there's no egos and no hang-ups. Everyone's just there to play music and not, this is what color shoes I'm wearing today and what is none of that happening, So that can open up, and you tend to learn what are the triggers that open up those doors, It's almost like you're trying to break into another world and take something from there and pull it back into ours. That's ideally because many songwriters have, kind of likened it to that process. Like Tom Petty or something, I go like way up high and I pull something back down to the earth. So the more you learn to do that, the better your chances of actually doing that. You're not going to do it every time. I mean, you watch Sachin, there's not every match that he makes a century. Sometimes he gets out on a duck, but he's still Sachin, So it's like that.
Can you give examples of these sort of triggers that you mentioned, where you can, you're collaborating with a bunch of people and shit happens?
Yeah, I mean, it's all over that second album. Then there. Do you want me to play you something? It's kind of pretty cool. I'll let me just see if I can find it because it's on some hard disk. But this is the first time we ever played North Star together, and I had kind of put the whole thing together in terms of a basic arrangement, but I'd left things open into what would happen in that middle jam section. And one of the things we did in Black Side Blues when we came to that middle section was to just break it down and have like Adi underpin something with a bass line or whatever, and then have Bevan move like, chord shapes on top of it. So we kind of said, okay, this is the bass line. I gave it to him, like, that. And told Bevan, okay, this is the chords. But after that, what happened is I'll play you that middle section. Okay, so this is the North Star middle section. Skip ahead. Here we go. Keep in mind, no one has any idea what's going to happen now. So what you hear is pretty much what went down on record, because I thought like that's a pretty good solo. So I went back and I learned it.
Wow.
I learned how to play the improv thing, and we put it down on the album. So that's
That's
kind of
incredible.
like there's no ideas, like the sense of like abandon, which was captured luckily. And obviously now I was able to go back and change a few things which I felt on retrospect, that could be changed, that could be better. But on the whole, the entire flow of that whole sequence is what happened, and that's what we try to recreate on the album.
Wow, that's superb. So, one of the things sort of Chuck told me about you is that from sort of being the brash young upstart in the late 90s, you are now like a senior citizen of the Indian rock scene and so on and so forth.
Buddha uncle.
Yeah, I was trying to be polite there. But yeah,
Buddha uncle.
but tell me, how has the scene kind of evolved over all of this time? Because whenever a new ecosystem emerges, and in that period of time in the 90s, ending at perhaps when Zero came around, I was writing a lot for the Rock Street Journal and I was into the scene. And it seemed at that time that our bands aren't really quite there yet. Some stuff is derivative. It's not that deep. And obviously the way ecosystems evolve is over a period of time. As more and more people come into it, as time passes, it gets deeper. The overall quality gets better. I mean, I kind of tuned out of the indie scene around the time Hook came out, and I remember at that time listening to that album and thinking it is, and that's what I was telling Chuck in the morning today, that it's just so much tighter and crisper than a lot of the other stuff that is coming out. And absolutely no disrespect intended to any of the other bands around that period. So fill me into how that scene kind of evolved, because at the same time the times are changing, right? Things are opening up, the internet is exploding. Where's sort of is there like is there one thing you can call as the indie rock scene today, or is it just different things happening all over the place? For me and those of my listeners who may not really have followed this, just kind of fill me into what's happened. What are the parts of it which kind of fill you with happiness when you look at it and you say, yeah, things happen just right? And where do you kind of feel disappointed or let down and so on?
Well, I've seen it like transition at least 3 or 4, maybe 5 or 6 times. So when I was just getting into playing music, I think probably the biggest band in the country at the time was Indiscreet. Now we had Star TV and we could see their videos on Star TV. So in terms of that reach, I don't think it's ever been as good since then. Um, then you had bands like Pentagram putting out albums of original music, which kind of inspired us to do the same. Now, when we put out that first album which we recorded in a balcony on a computer, which is to keep overheating, just getting into the technology where we were able to do it ourselves. That was the whole thing. We had creative control, and for whatever reason, you could put the blame squarely on us for how that sounds. But at least it was ours. We were like in total control. There was no one paying us money and saying, "Abhi aisa chahiye, waisa chahiye," or nothing of that was part of the process. So there's always been, artists in any country that are still, doing that and were able to do it at that time. If your dad owned a studio, for example, then, you could do that thing in the 80s, It just, the technology became a bit more democratic. Now, the downside to that is like now everyone can do it. So where do you put a distinction in between like a bona fide artist and some guy who's just playing around in GarageBand and came up with some groove that he liked, put on some other loop and put some fives. The moment that loop based thing started happening, I noticed like it became like now it's not just the realm of musicians. Now anyone with some taste and hopefully some taste and some technology can put the two together and come up with something that and once people start liking that, well, the thing is, as long as there are people to listen to it, you can't say that it's not legit or whatever. As long as the people listening to it and having an honest reaction, I think that's for me the parameters of legit. Whatever it is, you can have spoken word over some concert piano. Someone digs it, great. Who's to say this is good? Because like if for example, like like a kid. Yeah, my daughter, like she listens to stuff. She doesn't have those parameters about this is good, this is bad. You either like it or you don't like it. So that's a as honest a reaction as you're going to get. So I mean, there'll always be that, like whatever music is coming out. In terms of the scene itself, how it grows. I mean, when I was in New Zealand initially from 2004, I think that time it was like the biggest boom. I felt like I kind of missed out on a bit of that, and when I came back in 2009, I kind of caught the last bit of
Yeah.
it. So down to like the first NH7 festival to 2010 or 2011. I don't know. Chuck will probably know
2010.
better.
2010. Yeah.
2010. Yeah. So that was like a totally cool vibe because like, it was no like big, huge thing, which like, everyone and their friend came along to. It was just basically artists and people who knew that this was happening landed up in Pune, and it was a beautiful time. So the first couple of years, you notice like then it started getting bigger and bigger. And then with every scene, there'll be one upwards trajectory and then there's one downwards trajectory. And again, something else will come along and, take that. And, there's the whole thing about like indie versus Bollywood. Now, the moment anything becomes big, Bollywood absorbs it and, pulls it in because Bollywood has money and Bollywood can get whatever it wants. You're not going to say like, no, don't pay me 132 crores to make this song. Pay me that money. I'll do whatever you want. You take it. At least, you're somewhat financially secure and then you do what you want to, apart from that. So, I guess the whole idea is like till now, the biggest songwriters in India still don't get to control their own music. I think that's like the saddest part. I know music directors who didn't get permission to play their own songs. Can you believe that? Wow. For me, that was like a travesty of justice. Like why do you, because some other company owned it, and you know how the things get in the industry. It's not as rosy as it seems. People who control the money, they want to obviously control their investment, and they'll do whatever they have to do to make sure that they retain that power. So until I guess mainstream artists are able to, I mean, you look at India, it's kind of an anomaly in a sense because I think no other country does film music take such a dominant part of the mainstream music culture. Here it's like we have fed music with images from a time immemorial, since 60s or whatever. So like we had MTV before there was MTV in India. So it's always going to have some kind of a thing. And then now as the mainstream changes, like saying from Bollywood to now Netflix and all that is coming out, then there's like, oh, this also exists. And then the lines start blurring, between indie and mainstream. So many of the artists that you would classify as indie artists have got links. I mean, even down to me having played on, heaps of Bollywood songs. And for me, initially it was like a bit of like, I only want to play on good music. I don't want to play on shit. But then it became like, let's bring the best that we can to whatever it is that we are given today. It became like a challenge. What can you do with this? What can you turn it into? So that is what I got off on. So as long as, there was that, I still found it, challenging. Like you never knew what you were going to get, in that sense. And then you suddenly like, okay, come up with a killer hook now, right now. What do you do? It's like you either have the goods or you don't. So in that sense, it was like it still kind of separated the men from the boys, as it were. So like there's still killer musicianship in Bollywood. Like you see some of those Indian classical guys, dude, like there's like not, I live to live 5 lifetimes for me to get that good in how they go. And they just close their eyes and they do it, just like, because there's years and years and years of practice which has to go into that tradition for them to be able to even consider a good musician. It's like you pick up a guitar and you learn 3 chords and bro, I've written my own song, So it's a different world in that sense. But I've always had respect for good musicianship in any genre. You can always sense that, okay, this guy is a motherfucker at what he does. There's like a jazz saying, like the best guys are called that. So it's like you have to have respect for that sort of thing in that sense. So the lines will, keep blurring because that cross-pollination will keep happening. And who's basically controlling the money will ultimately control what's going in the mainstream, It just depends what I mean, Netflix has got a budget. Bro, there you go. Bollywood's got a budget. Bro, there you go. It's just like who's going to pay me to do this?
That is fascinating. I mean, I know you have a question of it, but I just wanted to close that out with an observation. I think, Warren, you're the only person I know who's actually played at each stage at NH7 Weekender. The rock and metal stage, the alternative stage, the folk stage, obviously, and also the electronic stage. I think I've seen you once play
No,
with either
there's two
Pentagram
other
or
people who have
Duelist.
done it. There's Sid Kuto and Sid Basrur. Both the Sids have
Fair
done it.
enough. Yeah, all right, fair enough. The first, then. Let's call her the first. Sorry, that is just an observation I wanted to get out of the way.
No, no, and that's a kind of a telling observation. So when you kind of look ahead, like what you've done over the last 10, 15 years is you've done work that pays the bills, right? It's your sessions work, your Bollywood work, whatever. It pays the bills, you got to do it. That's an imperative. At the same time, you've done the stuff that you love. How do you see things going forward? Is that also drudgery? Because it is also music. So is that also drudgery, or with what kind of attitude do you or approach do you go into it? Is some of that also work that you're proud of, or it's just something that you do to pay the bills and you got to do what you got to do?
My attitude is very simple. I get paid to play guitar, and that's a blessing. I'll never discount that enough. As long as I'm playing guitar, it doesn't really matter. In that sense, you have to always come back to it, because like even on gigs which I wasn't really enjoying, there were things that I would appreciate. Like the other musicians, you would have a hang after the gig. Make connections, that sort of thing. Then sometimes you like that shared misery brings you together. So that happens as well. In fact, like the thing which I used to not really like about the whole commercial thing was mainly the whole drudgery of traveling and the early morning flights. Yeah, that's brutal. I mean, like every musician has to deal with it, so I'm like the last person to complain. But it can take a toll on your system, especially if you like. I don't know how people can actually do tours for like months and months without going home. We were like banging out like maximum 3 gigs on the weekend, and we would come home to family at least on a Monday, Tuesday. We would see their faces before we took off again. But that whole thing about being away from home for a very long time, man, I have the ultimate respect for people who actually do that. And now with this virus thing, the whole life thing again is again up in air, because the moment the things start opening, then something else happens, and then now it's closed again. The same thing happened in New Zealand. Now, like the biggest artists, they had like a nice run till Jan, and then that Omicron thing happened, and everything is shut. So like also like being a musician, you have to like keep in mind that a lot of your income was seasonal. There'll be times of the year where you would make a lot of money, and then there were times of the year where nothing would come in. So then you have to keep in mind that all that money that I've stashed up from that is going to cover you for the rest of the year, all that sort of thing. So you just have to be adaptable, man. Like now I'm kind of putting my energy into like at least doing a YouTube thing and like seeing what happens there. Just do as many different things as possible, because for a long time it was just like I focused all my energy in Instagram, and then I was like, no, I can't really do only that. With this whole metaverse looming and everything, I don't really know how long I'm going to be on Instagram. Maybe things will change in 5 years or whatever. Remember, what was that thing that used to be the Orkut?
Yeah.
And before that, there was some
Hi-Fi.
MySpace.
Yeah.
Man, so many musicians who invested a lot of time in MySpace, and then when MySpace went bust, they kind of got disillusioned, and then they said bye to social media. So now I don't know if I should make a TikTok. In fact, I have made a TikTok account, but I think I posted only one video. I'm still learning about this algorithm and everything, like how it works, and this post at certain times of the day and all that shit. And sometimes I just want to say, F it, here it is, take it, you listen to it. Now my job is over. Your job has begun.
No, I've actually been enjoying your Instagram account, in the sense of, it's just these little nuggets of happiness that just keep coming when you play all these covers. I really enjoy that. And
I try to keep those live things now just as a temporary thing, because then I can, earlier on they used to save the chat. And I don't know if you've been on any of the Instagram live things. Sometimes there's some weird things that are in the chat which I react to. And when that's taken away, you just think I'm talking rubbish. What's this guy on about? So I tend not to save them anymore. I think a couple of good ones are saved for, just to see what it was like. But apart from that, like I don't really have a fixed time where I jump on, and because I know I could have a wider reach if I did that. But to me, it kind of feels more authentic if I'm feeling it. Sometimes, you just feel like playing, and you feel like seeing, okay, what do you want me to play? Okay, I'll play that. And sometimes I don't want to play requests. I was like, shut up and just let me do what I want to do right now. So it's kind of hard to say that without being deemed like arrogant or impolite. But sometimes like I have a better idea of what would be good to play right now. So just leave it to the DJ. I'm the DJ right now. So let me do it. And sometimes I'm like totally open, man. Like, what do you want me to play? You want to play some Black Sabbath? Okay, here you go. Because it just depends what mood you're in. So it's kind of cool that way. And in terms of posting, regular stuff, it's like something I'm horrible at. I don't really have scheduled posts or anything like that. If I'm feeling up to it, I try to remain as authentic as possible to myself. The moment that goes away, then for me it becomes like, why am I doing this?
Yeah, no, 100%. I was about to just put that word in. I think the coolest thing about your account is the authenticity. The fact that it's not planned. This it's like you don't have scheduled stuff that happens. You know that like this stuff is gonna happen. You'll do a live once in a while. You'll do this. You'll do that, and it just makes it feel more human.
I feel guilty promoting my own gigs on Instagram.
And that's as authentic as it gets.
Putting more than one post about a gig. I was like, I posted it. Don't want to keep talking about the same thing.
So tell me something, when we are young, for most people, when we are young, we have goals. I want to do this, I want to do that, so on and so forth. As you grow older, you realize that those goals are pointless. They keep evolving anyway. Many of them don't happen. Many of your dreams are not going to come true. You kind of figure it out. And you figure out that the path to both excellence and happiness lies not in achieving goals, but in just setting up processes, living your life in ways that make you happy, taking happiness in those small joys. You wake up in the morning and I assume for you, if you wake up in the morning and you're just going to play around with your guitar and record something and blah, blah, you're already feeling happy at the start of the day because that's what you want to do. The goal may not matter. So has there been a similar sort of evolution with the way that you look at life, especially with parenthood and all? Because I guess being a father then must make you take that step back. And when you were young, were there goals like, hey, I want to be a world famous guitarist, or Zero will be this big band or whatever? And where you are today, what do you think of as making you happy over the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? Is it just doing the stuff that you love without thinking about what comes out of it? Or is it that, no, there are these things that I also want to kind of figure out?
I'll tell you about like goals when I was much younger, like around the time I was 17 or 18. I wanted to play Rang Bhavan. I wanted to get stoned with my friends, and I wanted to have a girlfriend. So by the time I was 18, all those three things had been accomplished. So I was, onto a good streak there. Then things started happening with the band and everything. And then, like after Rang Bhavan was the next thing. Like I said, we did the Great Indian Rock thing. But by the time I think I reached around 30 or so, then I figured, actually the whole process the whole journey is as important, if not more important, than the goals you achieve. So in that sense, I've never really been the most ambitious person. Like I want to play Madison Square Garden. I was pretty like realistic. Like Rang Bhavan's a good, and Rang Bhavan is as good as Madison Square Garden for me personally. Like that's like that venue's got like plenty of history and vibe and everything like that. So in terms of like also having a music accepted. Now, how many listeners is enough? Once you get to a point, like if you get to a point where your Spotify streams, your streaming payments can support your lifestyle, that's great, but then you need so many of those, which means making totally different choices, which, for whatever reason, is not something I want to do right now. If for whatever reason suddenly it becomes popular, I'm not going to like say, hey, no, keep it only to like, hardcore listeners. Whoever wants to listen to it, let them listen to it. So in that sense of like numbers and everything, I've never been able to play that game without having a bit of a laugh about, how ridiculous the whole thing is. What really matters at the end of the day, like just genuine enjoyment from the music and while making it and while listening to it. If you can reduce it down, I've always been that like, let's reduce it to like the simplest thing that it could be and find some enjoyment in that. And then, the other things tend to take care of themselves. So In terms of goals, I guess like just keeping a roof over the family's head is like you know the main thing right now. And if we can make some good music while doing that, then that's going to keep us alive in the creative and in spiritual sense. Um, and also like uh, finding as many different kinds of music to appreciate, because life is short. You're never going to get to the bottom of it. You're never going to find the magic chord or whatever it is. So I just like finding peace. The thing is, when I find music that I don't know how it's done, where I don't know the formula, I don't know the magic trick behind it, I appreciate that more, because then it becomes like a very like I just enjoy it for its sake. The moment I know where okay, this is the formula, I was like, this is like leave it for someone else to enjoy this. But there's still like a lot of pop music I still love, like Def Leppard or White Snake, and you can read the producers telling you, okay, this is why we made so and so creative decision, which is not exactly the most musical one or whatever. It still works, because that's something I guess you enjoy when you were younger and you didn't have those judgmental faculties about you. Um, so again, who's to say what is real? You know, uh, the the realist you can get is when you're able to put in something that is honest, and the listener is able to perceive that honesty and that authenticity, or whatever you want to call it. For me, then at least that's the first thing taken care of. And then you see later like where we're going to play, what kind of gigs we're going to do, what's the backstage rider like. All that will come later. Another guy who I've always appreciated for who is able to do that as well as Tajza Junaid. He's always done exactly what he wanted to do, and you can sense that in his music. So like it's almost like we've had like parallel careers. And now one of the things he's done went in for an Oscar nomination, which is damn amazing. Like super happy for him right now.
I was just listening to his track, What Color Is Your Raindrop, yesterday. Beautiful track. And somehow it reminded me of the similar vibe to Ode to a Sunny Day. I just kind of heard them back to back. And it just, both of them are just so soothing and so kind of wonderful. And when I was watching his video for Dastan, somebody left an interesting comment. They said that every time they reach 2 minutes 15 seconds in the song, they start crying. And then below that, someone else left a comment saying that, why do you start crying? And it's just a song. And then somebody else came and said that, no, it's not a song, it's a story, right? And every time I reach that part of the story, I know what's coming, but I can't help myself. And I just thought that that is such a beautiful sentiment. And sometimes if you listen to music, and I have to keep reminding myself to be more mindful in all the things I do, not just music, but sometimes when you listen to music like that, that magical thing can happen where you feel you're going on a journey through the song and so on. So when you sort of write your music, do you also feel that sure, it's there are no vocals, you're just it's you're building a soundscape, you're playing your guitar, you're doing your thing, but there is a story, there is a progression. Do you also feel that? Does your own music move you sometimes?
Yeah, it has to actually at some point in the process. Otherwise, it gets scrapped. At some point, I have to get like the chills or the. I mean, it won't happen again and every single time I listen to it. But I mean, at one point, like "Ode to a Sunny Day" was my music that I listened to fall asleep. For like a good month or couple of months, I just put it on every night while going to sleep. Otherwise, like my head was full of too much stuff that kept you awake. So that was the thing that kind of soothed those beasts in your head and say, okay, it's okay, now go to sleep. So if it has that effect on you, like I said, it's a good chance it'll have that effect on someone else. And there's also things like sometimes you take for granted that you do it, and it just happens. And then someone else will say, oh, wow, that's amazing. I was like, oh, you like that? And there's sometimes like where you think like, wow, how clever I am here. And no one gets it, It just flies over everyone else. Then like not one person will bring it up or whatever. So there's been a few of those, but you never know. Maybe like 20 years later, someone will say, hey, what about, that little thing? Like on the Zero songs. I'll be like, yeah, someone finally got it.
So, as we wrap up, a couple of final questions. And one is, if there are young musicians listening to this, and obviously it's challenging in India or anywhere, I guess, to be a young musician, because you don't know where the money is going to come from. You've always got to sort of find that fine balance between doing what you love and just having to make a living, right? And what advice would you give them? And I mean, in a general, broad sense, not just career advice in terms of making money or making music, but even learning music, appreciating music. Like, if you were to meet, say, the 18-year-old or the 17-year-old before your three goals come true, if you were to meet the 17-year-old Warren today, what advice would you give him?
In fact, I just put out a video today saying like 10 things I wish I.
We'll link it from the show notes. I have.
Some of it is a bit technical because like there were musical discoveries that happened like much later, which I wish had, been communicated to me. Somebody should have told me that, you know. Generally, I would say keep your enjoyment of music sacrosanct. Never get to a point where it just becomes a drudgery, because then you got to check out at that point and do something else for a while and then maybe come back to it. So if it gets to that point, you're doing something wrong. Try to play with as many good musicians you can as possible. Like I think like my best growth spurt as a musician happened at this time where I was playing with Cole and a couple of his friends in this covers band every Friday night. And it's brutal. I mean, you go through that process of just playing like what's popular at that point of time, but you try to do it in a way which like you yourself are feeling it. Otherwise, people are not going to react on that. So when you're the worst guy in a band, that's probably like the best position you can be in. If you think you're like the shit hot guy in the band, leave the band, right? Then find some better guys to play with. I mean, it sounds easier said than done, but you kind of have to get to that process. I mean, keep an eye on the money. I mean, know where your bills are being paid and stuff like that. Don't like be that, I'm only going to do it for art's sake and everything. You have to obviously make sure your financial things are, met. But like you can always find a balance. That finding a balance sometimes is tricky, but that's what I've been doing. I've just been juggling both ends of that thing, trying to keep afloat. Don't really focus only on one genre of music. Try to like steal from as many different people as you can, because then no one will know you're stealing. If you steal from one person, everyone's going to notice, oh, that's where you got all your shit from. So you take a little bit, then no one will really notice that, where you've got your stuff from. And the thing is to kind of develop a certain amount of confidence in what you do. Otherwise, it's never going to get past that point. If you're always second guessing yourself, you're never going to get to a point. Like I bet all your favorite artists had some amount of confidence in what they were doing, which enabled them to just put it out, and do whatever it is that they're doing. Yeah.
Just an observation on this, to me, in many ways, is kind of surreal being part of this recording as, a fan of your music for so long. And this might seem kind of cheesy, but this entire recording itself felt like a Blackstreet Blues song in much the same way that you read out that quote of my own that I wrote. It started off with the nice punchy bits, and then it moved into a slightly poignant part, and then towards the end there was the emotional guitar solo when you were talking about all this, and now it's ending on the crescendo again. So I know it's a cheesy way of tying it all back in, but that to me is the observation of this entire conversation itself, and it was like a perfect Blackstreet Blues interview in some sense. So yeah, that's the observation that I have. It's not really a question. I don't have anything else to ask on this.
As long as it works.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah. I mean, to compare a session I've done with a Blackstreet Blues song is a great compliment, but I'll take time to process exactly what you meant. But since you want to end on a crescendo, we can end on a crescendo because this is often the favorite part of the show for many people, which is, in general, I ask my guests to recommend books or films or music which they absolutely love and they want to share with the world. In your case, I guess it'll mainly be music, but whatever else you want to recommend. But in the sense, stuff that you're so excited about that you want to stand on a soapbox and shout at the world, hey, listen to this. This is amazing.
I mean, I guess everyone's seen Spinal Tap. If you haven't, please check it out. That's like one of my favorite films. All the Monty Python stuff I love, especially I think people these days who have, problems with religion should watch Life of Brian and kind of figure out why this whole belief it's almost like a germ, how it tends to propagate. So do check that out. The other things I'm interested in, like cooking and stuff like that. There's this nice account I found on Instagram called Masala Lab. So he actually talks about the science of Indian cooking, which I find.
He's been on my show, yeah, Krish's show. We had a 3-hour episode, and he's a fine musician, by the way. If you haven't check out some of his music, yeah, he does incredible. Like he'll take a famous Western song or a piece of opera and convert it to Carnatic, and he'll do his things with it. So I think you'll love him. Yeah, you should check.
Awesome. I will check out his music. There's an account on YouTube I found called Bill McClintock, who does some amazing mashups. Like his specialty is taking like 80s metal and mashing it up with 70s R&B, which, you'll find some. There's one with Aerosmith, Sweet Emotion, and Aretha Franklin, which is like amazing. It kind of gave me a little bit of the goosebumps when Aretha kicked into the chorus, which, you get in any case. If you haven't heard Derek Trucks, please check him out. If you haven't heard Michael Landau, please check him out. He's like if Hendrix learned a bit more jazz and kind of got like a more polished guitar sound. If you haven't heard Jeff Beck doing Nitin Sawhney's Nadia, please check that out. That's one of the finest bits of guitar playing. There's another one he did called Where Were You, which I think is like one of the toughest things to play because he's playing melodies using the whammy bar. And that thing is like notoriously tough to control exactly in pitch, but he manages to do it. So it's like these little bit of, like the gods have visited us, and that sort of thing. Again, like when I can't figure out how it's done, it just like, I can't figure out that magic trick which makes it like more incredible. That sort of thing. Apart from that, let me see. If you haven't heard Aranjoy Sarkar, he's one of the finest blues guitar players. That's what a blues guitar player does. I'm not a blues guitar player by any standard. I play the blues, but I'm not a blues man. So if you want to listen to an authentic, bona fide blues guitar player, I'd say Aranjoy and Rudy Walang, of course. He's been keeping that style alive for years. With regards to more commercial stuff, that's his name, Achint, who did the Scam 1992 and the Rocket Boys thing. He's onto something cool. And some of my favorite indie artists, Tejas, Komorevi, Rohan Rajadaksha, Nicholson, Sand Dunes. I mean, if you see who I follow, I guess on Instagram, you'll kind of find all my favorite musicians. So check them out as well. I mean, I think sometimes like my main role is for me to say, hey, check this out. Don't listen to just me doing it. This is just my way of saying, listen to Jeff Beck or Gary Moore, whoever those guys who, influenced me. Please go and check out every single person who you think influenced me. There's something cool there.
Yeah, I think Amit, for the first time, you might have to actually create a Spotify playlist to share as a link on the show notes to put all these together.
I'll put all Neil Young songs, bro.
Yeah.
And some Joni Mitchell to boot. Yeah.
In fact, Crosby, Stills and Nash is like something that my parents used to listen to because my dad used to be in this short-lived acoustic trio with Nandu Bende and Remo Fernandez. So they were like, they did Crosby, Stills covers and all back in the day. Actually, let me give a shout out to my dad, man. He's like an awesome guy who never really did music full time. I mean, he was in a few bands of his time, but he's one of like the finest musicians you'll find. But he was a guy who was just comfortable to provide for his family, and then at these family occasions he would pull out the guitars. But if it wasn't for him, man, I wouldn't be here, honestly.
And now the Black Side Blues analogy is complete because the opening riff, which you started with your dad, you kind of ended the interview with. So now it's perfect.
Awesome.
Great. Guys, Warren, Chuck, thank you so much. I mean, this was such a splendid conversation. I really enjoyed this.
My pleasure. I'm glad we're still awake after all this time.
If you enjoyed listening to this episode, head on over to blackstratblues.com or follow the links in the show notes, discover Warren's music, and more importantly, support Warren's music. You can follow Warren on Twitter at blackstratblues, that's one word. You can follow Chuck at Chuck_Gopal, and Chuck, hey, thank you again for coming over. And you can follow me on Twitter at Amit Varma, AmitVarma. You can browse past episodes of The Scene and the Unseen at sceneunseen.in on any podcast app of your choice. Thank you for listening. Did you enjoy this episode of The Scene and the Unseen? If so, would you like to support the production of the show? You can go over to sceneunseen.in/support and contribute any amount you like to keep this podcast alive and kicking. Thank you.